A certain man, long dismissed as the worthless eldest son of Calpertium, carried a reputation that weighed heavier than any blade. He was branded uncontrollable, a reclusive sword master who shut himself away, often whispered about as a madman. His name was Ghislain Perdium. Amid the chaos, a knight clad in armor writhed in pain, struggling to comprehend the reality of his downfall. He had been defeated by none other than Ghislain, the very man he had scorned as human refuse. To the knight, it was unthinkable that he, the finest warrior of the North, had been bested by someone so reviled. Around him, the bodies of fallen comrades lay scattered, silent witnesses to the massacre. As the knight trembled, another presence emerged from the shadows. A man in gleaming armor, wielding a massive axe, stepped forward. His voice was cold, detached, as he remarked on the knight's surroundings. He spoke of the considerable expense it had cost to prepare such intricate traps, his piercing gaze drilling into the broken warrior as he asked if the setting suited him. The knight's fury burned. To think that Ghislain, the worthless bastard he had mocked, could have orchestrated this carnage was unbearable. Grinding his teeth, he demanded to know whether Ghislain had truly foreseen everything. Ghislain drew closer, his expression carved in stone, and calmly revealed that he had indeed anticipated every move. He spoke with chilling precision. He had known their numbers, uncovered their spies, even identified the source of their reinforcements. Every detail, every decision, every step, they had all fallen neatly into his hands. The knight's disbelief mounted. His voice rose in desperation as he shouted that he always carried a hidden ace. How could someone as insignificant as Ghislain have constructed such a flawless victory? Before the knight could continue, Ghislain silenced him with a sharp kick to the face. His voice was steady and commanding as he ordered him to stop talking. Removing his helmet, Ghislain declared that his goal was not merely to win this battle, but to claim victory in every war yet to come. His smile was one of absolute certainty as he asked if the knight understood why his triumph was inevitable. With confidence unshaken, Ghislain stated that he possessed all the plans necessary for conquest. The story shifted to 1 year earlier, in a soldier's camp of the Lithania kingdom near the Perdium estate. Inside a dimly lit tent, Ghislain jolted awake, shocked to find himself alive. His hand instinctively reached for his throat, as though to confirm his survival. Confusion flooded him as memories resurfaced moments ago, or so it seemed. He had faced certain death. He recalled being disarmed, his sword knocked away. Blood poured from his mouth as he fell to his knees before a knight clad in golden armor, his red hair burning like fire. This man was Aiden, one of the 7 strongest knights on the continent. Aiden's voice carried the weight of finality as he proclaimed the war finished. Pointing his blade at Ghislain, he asked if the defeated son of Perdium had any last words. Struggling for breath, Ghislain admitted with bitter regret that he had failed to fulfill his vengeance. Yet, even in defeat, he spat out a curse of defiance, wishing for Aiden's eventual downfall. Aiden only smiled, mocking his words. He ridiculed Ghislain as a delusional fool and revealed that he had not expected him to be the eldest son of the ruined Perdium household. With cruel satisfaction, he reminded Ghislain how he had abandoned his family after the death of his sister. The revelation struck Ghislain like a blade to the heart. How could Aiden, a knight from another kingdom, know such personal truths? Aiden sneered at his shock, explaining that he had hunted him relentlessly. With a sinister grin, he confessed that the fall of the Perdium family had been no accident. It was a conspiracy, a joint effort between his allies and the Deline household. The truth left Ghislain reeling. The betrayal was far greater than he had imagined. As Aiden pressed his sword closer to his throat, his expression darkened. He declared that there was no reason to share any more secrets, for Ghislain's end was already sealed. As Ghislain lay on the brink of death, he demanded that his end be accepted. Yet Ghislain, consumed with fury, swore that he would never forgive him. Unmoved by this defiance, Aiden delivered a decisive strike, severing Ghislain's head in a single blow. The scene shifted to the present. Ghislain staggered toward a barrel of water and peered into its surface, only to find his head still firmly attached to his body. Confusion gripped him. Was he hallucinating? As he studied his reflection, he noticed something even stranger. He looked far younger than he remembered. Suspicion gnawed at him. Could he have been captured and used for an experiment by mages? Determined to seek vengeance if that were true, Gislin's gaze fell upon a sword resting near the barrel. While contemplating his situation, a voice called out from outside the tent, addressing him as young master. A man entered the soldier Ricardo, loyal to the Perdium household. He urged Gislin to step outside, assuring him that he knew he was awake. Before Ricardo could react, Gislin slipped behind him and pressed the blade to his neck. Startled, Ricardo froze as Gislin warned in a cold tone that his life depended on how truthfully he answered his questions. But Ricardo, still addressing him as young master, replied calmly that Gislin was crossing the line. Taken aback by Ricardo's composure, Gislin demanded an explanation. Ricardo, with unsettling nonchalance, pushed Gislin back and remarked that he had simply worn himself out earlier by throwing a tantrum before collapsing into sleep. He reminded him of his outburst, where he had demanded command of an army to raid the orcs. Gislin, still unable to grasp what was happening, accused Ricardo of spouting nonsense. Unfazed, Ricardo began packing a bag and ordered Gislin to prepare, stating that others were waiting. Unease mounting, Gislin asked where they were headed. Without hesitation, Ricardo replied that their destination was the Perdium estate. The words struck Gislin like a thunderclap. He seized Ricardo by the arm, demanding to know if he truly meant the fallen Perdium estate. The scene shifted again. Gislin stood atop a cliff, gazing down at the estate in the distance. To his shock, it stood unscathed, exactly as it once had. His memories screamed otherwise. He had seen it burn, reduced to ashes, destroyed beyond recognition. Yet here it was, pristine and untouched. Ricardo stepped closer, asking if Gislin had been plagued by a nightmare. He cautioned that referring to the Perdium household as fallen could result in expulsion by the Count himself. Gislin, however, could not accept this reality. Convinced it must be a dream, he pinched his cheek. The sharp sting of pain shattered that illusion. Everything was real. The reflection of his youthful face and the sight of the untouched estate confirmed the truth. He had somehow returned to the past. Memories of his reckless younger self came flooding back. His bitterness and feelings of inferiority had driven him into conflict with his family, and their relentless criticism had finally forced him to flee. Years later, hardened by countless battles as a mercenary, he built a reputation and a name feared across the land. By the time he returned, ready to atone for his mistakes, the Perdium household had already been reduced to ruins. Now, standing before his family's flag waving proudly above the camp, Gislin felt a surge of overwhelming relief. Everything he thought he had lost, his home, his family, his people, was still there. The weight of that realization drove him to laughter, uncontrollable and edged with madness, as he fought the wild urge to burst into song. But the euphoria was fleeting. Gislin recalled Ricardo's earlier words about their mission, the upcoming raid on the orcs. The memory dragged him back to a far darker moment, the disastrous raid of his past life, when almost the entire squad perished. Back then, Gislin had joined the operation seeking recognition. Reports had claimed only 3 orcs were stationed in the area, and blinded by ambition, he underestimated the threat. Lacking the skill to command but desperate to prove himself, he insisted on leading. When the squad encountered more than 20 orcs instead of 3, the result was nothing short of catastrophic. Nearly everyone was slaughtered. This time, Gislin swore he would not repeat that mistake. He would approach the monsters with caution and strategy. Though orcs were not clever, their sheer strength made them lethal. His greatest challenge, however, lay elsewhere, earning the trust of soldiers who saw him as nothing more than a useless failure. As these thoughts consumed him, a deafening crash shattered his focus. A wooden guard post was hurled through the air, smashing into the ground before him. A soldier screamed, alerting the others. The orcs had arrived. Chaos erupted instantly. Men scrambled into position, their fear betraying them. Gislin's chest tightened as dread washed over him. In his previous life, the orcs had attacked later. This time, they had come far earlier. He watched, horrified, as the beasts stormed the camp. Towering figures with crude but devastating weapons tore through the defenders with terrifying ease. Through the chaos, a voice rang out above the panic. A man clad in blue armor bellowed commands, rallying the squad to form ranks. It was Scoven, commander of the raid party. With sword in hand, he ordered the men into a defensive formation before stepping forward to confront one of the beasts himself. The orc's massive weapon swung down, its force enough to crush a man in an instant. Scoven barely managed to block with his blade, the clash reverberating through the battlefield. Yet the situation worsened by the moment. It was clear they had been ambushed, and their enemies' numbers were far beyond anything they had prepared for. As Scoven steadied himself, a soldier's voice shouted a warning. He turned just in time to see another orc looming behind him, weapon raised high. Before the blow could strike, a figure shoved him out of harm's way. Gislin stood in his place. Scoven froze in disbelief as his young master faced the beast head-on. The orc's axe descended, but Gislin reacted without hesitation. His sword slashed upward, severing its fingers in a spray of blood. Before the creature could recover, he drove another strike deep into its thigh, halting its advance. The squad watched in stunned silence as the orc shrieked and crumpled to the ground. But Gislin felt no satisfaction. His cuts were far from perfect, and the absence of mana weighed heavily on him. Frustration gnawed at his mind. If only he had returned to this moment sooner. He turned sharply to Scoven. "Give me command," he demanded. The commander blinked, taken aback. Reckless as always, but this, to ask for command of the squad, here, in the midst of battle, it was beyond anything Scoven could have expected. Straightening his stance, he refused without hesitation. Authority granted by the Lord was not something he could simply hand over. Annoyed but not surprised, Gislin reflected bitterly. Had their positions been reversed, he too would have dismissed such an outrageous demand from someone inexperienced. His thoughts were cut short as another orc barreled toward him. Scoven shouted for him to retreat, declaring him unfit to lead. Gislin ignored the order. Instead, he tightened his grip on his weapon. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he hurled his sword with all his strength. The blade sailed past Scoven's shoulder. Instinctively, the commander flinched and spun around. Furious, he grabbed Gislin by the collar, ready to demand an explanation when the sound of steel meeting flesh rang out behind him. Turning, he saw the orc collapse, Gislin's sword buried deep in its skull. Scoven's eyes widened in disbelief. How did you strike with such precision?" Unmoved, Gislin's gaze remained steady. "The key to victory is morale," he replied calmly. "If soldiers let fear rule them, they're already defeated." Scoven glanced at the squad. The men trembled, their courage faltering against the orc's monstrous cries. Gislin, however, smiled with quiet confidence. "We seize momentum now," he declared. Without hesitation, he surged forward, yanking his sword free from the fallen orc's skull before leaping into the heart of the battle. Gislin landed atop another foe, driving his blade deep into its head. The soldiers gasped as he stood proudly on the creature's corpse, his voice rising in a furious shout. He taunted the orcs, daring them to face him, swearing he would cut down every last one of them. Enraged, the remaining orcs fixed their eyes on him. Unfazed, Gislin slashed open the stomachs of 2 advancing enemies and hacked the arm off a third. Blood sprayed across the battlefield as heads rolled in his wake. From a distance, Scoven stared in disbelief. Though a skilled wielder of mana himself, he knew even seasoned warriors struggled against orcs. Yet Gislin, a young man who seemed frail at a glance, carved through them with a precision that defied reason. But as the clash wore on, Scoven noticed his exhaustion creeping in. Gislin's movements became smaller, sharper, each strike carefully measured to conserve strength. Still, every blow struck the orc's weak points with near-surgical accuracy. Scoven realized then this was the fighting style of a true swordmaster, one who had mastered combat without mana, relying solely on instinct and refined technique. Even as fatigue threatened to slow him, Ghislain continued to mock his enemies, scoffing at their pride as a warrior race and declaring he hadn't even begun to fight seriously. His bravado drew all the orcs into a frenzied charge. Ricardo, watching from the ranks, was stunned. When a soldier beside him pointed out that Ghislain appeared to be fleeing, Ricardo grew alarmed and called out to Scoven. Scoven frowned, puzzled at first. Ghislain's taunts had drawn the enemy's full attention, a clever tactic, but the direction of his retreat made no sense. He was heading straight for a cliff. Then, in an instant, the commander understood. Without hesitation, he barked an order for his soldiers to form a shield wall and prepare to follow their young master. At the cliff's edge, Ghislain braced himself against the onslaught, silently trusting Scoven to see through his intentions. He knew his stamina was nearly gone, he could not hope to slay the entire horde alone. Yet he smiled faintly, assuring himself he had done enough. As if on cue, the thunder of marching soldiers drew the orcs' attention. Turning, they saw Scoven's men advancing in formation, spears leveled, shields locked. The hesitation in the monster's eyes was all Ghislain needed. Grinning, he declared the timing perfect, then hurled himself over the cliff. The moment he vanished from sight, Scoven roared his command. The soldiers pressed forward, their spears thrusting into the enemy ranks as they forced the orcs back step by step. The beasts, overwhelmed and unable to resist, were driven over the edge one after another. Their massive bodies tumbled to the rocks below, painting the ground red. The soldiers stood breathless, awestruck by the impossible victory. As silence fell over the battlefield, Scoven rushed to the cliff's edge and shouted for Ghislain. Relief flooded him when he spotted his young master clinging desperately to the rock face, his sword jammed into the stone to hold him steady. Ghislain, trembling and drenched in sweat, managed a weak smile. Scoven reached down, hand outstretched. But Ghislain's strength had left him. His grip faltered, his hand slipped, and the sword tore free. With no way to hold on, he plunged into the abyss. Scoven and his men could only watch in horror as he vanished into the darkness below. Then, silence shifted to memory. Ghislain heard a voice calling a voice he knew instantly. Elena. Images of his sister rushed through his mind, her tears after their mother's death, her gratitude for his care, and the cruel words she once hurled at him, claiming she hated him. The memories blurred together until he saw her as a child again, tugging at his hand and begging to follow him. Jolted awake by the vision, Ghislain's eyes snapped open. He found himself lying in a room, a cloth laid across his forehead. The soldiers had rescued him. Relief washed over him, but the dream lingered, strange and unsettling in his thoughts. Attempting to rise, Ghislain was struck by a wave of pain that left his body trembling from exhaustion. He remained on the bed, struggling to steady himself, when the door opened. A maid with long, white hair stepped in. Belinda. Her face lit up with relief and joy upon seeing him awake. Placing a bucket on the nearby table, she scolded him gently, reminding him that she had warned him to leave the fighting to the soldiers. To her astonishment, Ghislain suddenly rushed forward and embraced her tightly. Belinda froze, caught off guard by such uncharacteristic affection. Startled, she asked if she had done something to offend him, but he quickly reassured her. He explained that he was simply overjoyed to see her again. Since his childhood, Belinda had served not only as his maid but also as his tutor, patiently guiding him despite his often reckless and immature behavior. Yet, in his previous life, after the Perdium family fell into ruin, Belinda disappeared, and he never saw her again. Now, holding her once more filled him with a bittersweet sense of relief. Still bewildered by his strange behavior, Belinda asked why he was acting this way when they saw each other every day. Ghislain hesitated but knew he couldn't remain silent. He urged her to listen carefully and revealed that disaster was coming for their family. Confused, she pressed for clarification. With a grave expression, Ghislain confessed the truth: he had already died once and returned to life. Belinda laughed nervously, dismissing his words as exaggeration brought on by his near-death experience with the orcs. Ghislain shook his head, insisting he wasn't speaking of the recent battle. But she refused to believe him, telling him instead to focus on his recovery. Frustration welled up inside him when he realized she would not take his warning seriously. Changing the subject, Belinda asked what he would have done had he been too injured to attend the upcoming festival. The question caught Ghislain off guard. She reminded him that his younger sister, Elena, had been looking forward to the event, hoping to attend it with him. It was, Belinda stressed, the perfect chance for the siblings to heal their strained relationship. Ghislain's gaze shifted to a picture of himself with Elena, and memories stirred. The annual festival had always come at this time of year, yet in his previous life, his own bitterness and trauma had kept him from enjoying it. He asked when the festival would begin. Belinda replied that it was set for next week. The words struck him deeply, for he remembered too well. A week from now was the day his entire life had changed forever. As he sank into thought, the door opened once more. Ghislain's eyes widened in shock. It was Elena. Without hesitation, he ran to her and pulled her into a tight embrace. Both Elena and Belinda stared in stunned silence. Elena, startled by her brother's sudden display of affection, frowned and asked what he thought he was doing. Ghislain told her he had missed her dearly, but Elena shoved him away, calling his behavior creepy. Her strength surprised him. He had never realized how physically strong she was. Brushing off her clothes, Elena explained she had only come because Belinda asked her to. Narrowing her eyes, she demanded to know what kind of game he was playing and whether he thought such antics could repair their relationship. Ghislain blinked in confusion and asked what she meant. With cold precision, Elena reminded him of his cruel words from the past, how he once told her to leave him alone because she was annoying, how he had even said her very presence disgusted him. The memory struck Ghislain like a blade. In his previous life, he had never been close to Elena, and he realized with horror just how terrible a brother he had been. Overcome with guilt, he lowered his head and apologized. Belinda's eyes widened. Never before had she seen her master apologize first. Elena, however, remained skeptical. She asked if he had hit his head, pointing out that she'd heard an orc had struck him during the raid. Annoyed, Ghislain wondered why both Belinda and Elena kept mentioning the orc attack. He snapped that they were mistaken. It was he who had defeated the orcs. But as soon as the words left his mouth, a sharp pain surged through him, and his body gave way. Elena smirked and teased him, pointing out that he had, in fact, been carried back unconscious after the battle. Belinda and Elena both laughed at his expense, leaving Ghislain bewildered but oddly comforted. Their laughter, their presence, it was exactly as he remembered. Deep inside, he felt warmth swell within him. Yet with it came regret for all the wasted years and missed moments. His thoughts turned again to the festival that would take place in a week. In his past life, he had coldly rejected Elena's invitation to go together, claiming the raid had left him too shaken. This time, he vowed, things would be different. That moment marked the last time he ever saw his sister. In his previous life, Elena's mangled body had been discovered alongside her bodyguards. The memory of her lifeless form haunted Ghislain, filling him with regret for not being there when she needed him most. As the weight of these thoughts consumed him, a knock broke his brooding. Two armored men stepped inside Jamal and Philip, Elena's bodyguards. Jamal informed Elena that they were waiting for her. Slightly annoyed, she reminded them that she had asked to be left alone. Bowing his head, Jamal apologized and explained that the servants had requested her oversight in preparing the festival supplies. This surprised Ghislain, who couldn't fathom why the maids would turn to her for such matters. Belinda, blunt as always, scoffed at his ignorance, pointing out that he spent his days idling away without concern for the estate. She revealed that Perdium was suffering from a severe labor shortage, forcing even Elena to take part in the preparations. the revelation shook Ghislain. In his former life, he had never once paid attention to the workings of the household. Elena rose, preparing to leave, when Ghislain suddenly offered to help. Both Elena and Belinda froze in disbelief. Elena, skeptical, asked if he had been struck on the head during the raid. Later, the town buzzed with activity as servants worked tirelessly for the festival. Elena's voice rang sharp as she scolded Ghislain, who had followed her despite her protests. She warned that his presence would only unsettle the workers. Ghislain countered, questioning whether this was truly how she treated someone trying to assist. Elena replied curtly, saying the best help he could offer was by staying out of their way. Her words stung, but Ghislain's mind drifted once again to the memory of finding her corpse in his past life. Her remains had been discovered in the slums, far from the festival grounds. Someone had either lured or forced her there. Determined not to let history repeat itself, he resolved to learn every corner of the castle to uncover hidden dangers. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps. A soldier rushed toward them, calling him "my lord." The voice stirred old memories, and Ghislain recognized the man instantly: Fergus. Panting and drenched in sweat, the old soldier expressed his relief at finding his young master alive after hearing news of the orc attack. Irritated by the constant reminders of the raid, Ghislain dismissed the subject. Elena, however, approached Fergus with a mischievous smile, explaining that her brother had been acting oddly since waking. She asked Fergus to escort him back to his chambers. The soldier agreed without hesitation, much to Ghislain's frustration. His former reputation as a hooligan was hindering him yet again. Accepting defeat for now, Ghislain postponed his plan to investigate the castle. Instead, he requested that Fergus take him to the old training grounds. The soldier blinked in surprise and asked why. With a resolute gaze, Ghislain declared that he intended to train. Fergus complied, and together they walked to the estate's training field. To Ghislain's surprise, the grounds were immaculate, well-kept weapons gleamed, and the field itself was ready for use. It was far more refined than anything he had ever encountered as a mercenary. Fergus explained that the facility had been maintained in the hope that Ghislain might one day use it. He confessed that he had always believed the young lord's reckless ways would eventually pass. Ghislain was moved by the man's quiet faith. Placing a hand on Fergus's armor, he declared that he intended to live a long life. Dying, he said gravely, was an experience he never wished to endure again. The old soldier stiffened at his words, puzzled by the strange weight they carried. He asked why his master spoke as though he had already experienced death. Ghislain, wearing a faint smile, praised his sharp perception. He revealed that he had indeed died once before and been given another chance. Fergus scoffed, brushing it off as a jest, and insisted he had no time for such nonsense. Ghislain then instructed Fergus to leave him, explaining that he wished to begin training immediately. Reluctantly, the old soldier bowed and departed. Left alone, Ghislain stood in silence, reflecting on the mistakes of his former life, how he had treated allies as obstacles and driven away those who might have stood by his side. Memories of betrayal and regret welled up once more. Elena's death had been orchestrated by a rival territory, her loss exploited as the spark to provoke Perdium into war. That conflict eventually drove their household to ruin. Her tragic demise was the catalyst for it all. Determined to alter the course of his family's fate, Ghislain resolved to set everything right in this lifetime. To succeed, he knew he had to strengthen his body and refine his abilities. Time was short, but Ghislain carried confidence in his mastery of mana. Sitting cross-legged in quiet meditation, he closed his eyes and focused. Mana, the mysterious force that allowed humans to surpass their natural limits, was notoriously difficult to sense and control. For Ghislain, however, it came naturally. Even amid chaos, he could attune himself to the particles in the air, drawing them together as if weaving fine threads onto a spool. With the battle-hardened knowledge of his past life, forging a mana core felt almost effortless. Yet one core alone would never suffice. His rise as one of the 7 strongest men had come from mastering something far greater, an advanced technique discovered in a half-burnt magic tome. By expanding the process, he could form not just one, but multiple cores, creating a linked network capable of generating devastating power. As he forced mana through his veins, his body trembled with pain. A scream tore from his throat, and blood spilled from his nose and mouth. Despite his efforts, he managed only 3 cores. The realization left him shaken. In his previous life, he had succeeded in forging 5. The method was formidable but came with crippling demands, draining his mana reserves faster than his body could endure. It had been this very weakness that Aiden had exploited, bringing an entire Night Order to overwhelm him when his strength faltered. Ghislain remained certain that, had the battle been fought fairly, the outcome would have been different. Though his progress fell short of what he once achieved, Ghislain did not despair. He was younger now, with time and determination on his side. He vowed to refine the technique further, his heart burning with fury. He swore vengeance upon Aiden and the treacherous allies of House Deline who had conspired to destroy Perdium. This time, he would not fall. This time, he would be the one to strike the final blow. The scene shifted to the day of the festival. Dressed in formal gear, Ghislain stepped into the bustling grounds. His presence immediately caught Elena's eye, and her shock was evident. She hurried to him, asking why he had come, reminding him that he had never shown interest in such gatherings before. Ghislain answered calmly, explaining that as a member of Perdium's household, it was his duty to attend from time to time. Elena studied him suspiciously. She noted that he had been acting strangely as of late and mentioned the rumors she had heard about his week-long training regimen, something entirely unlike his former indolent self. Ghislain, wearing a strained expression, insisted that there was nothing unusual about the heir of a knightly family taking his training seriously. She reminded him that he had once dismissed such responsibilities, even calling their father insufferable, while boasting that he could not wait to claim the title of lord. The words struck Ghislain, leaving him stunned to hear his past sentiments thrown back at him. Elena, however, only smiled warmly. She confessed that she liked the changes she saw in him, saying it felt as though the brother she once knew had returned. Her words weighed heavily on Ghislain. Reflecting on the past week, he realized his actions were already reshaping both his reputation and the trajectory of his future. While lost in thought, his gaze drifted to Belinda, who was quietly instructing Elena's guards. She ordered them to handle any trouble caused by Ghislain discreetly, emphasizing that no problems should arise during a festival filled with guests. The men assured her they understood. Despite events unfolding much as they had before, Ghislain struggled to gauge the subtle differences created by his intervention. Every detail mattered, and he reminded himself of the importance of responding to each shift with precision. With that resolve, he remained by Elena's side throughout the festival, all the while keeping a careful watch for the faintest sign of danger. After some time, Elena sat down, admitting she had enjoyed the festival to a degree, though she found it repetitive and wondered if anything new had been introduced this year. Ghislain remarked that it was unusual nothing unfortunate had occurred, speculating that perhaps his presence had deterred trouble. As they reflected, a soldier approached Elena and suggested visiting other areas where fresh events were supposedly taking place. He explained that a friend had mentioned these happenings and invited Elena to accompany him. Surprised, Elena grasped the soldier's hand with excitement, thrilled by the idea of something different to experience. While watching them, Ghislain's expression darkened. He realized, with growing disbelief, that the 2 soldiers accompanying them, Jamal and Philip, were traitors. These men had once been among the most trusted knights of their household, protectors of Elena since childhood, men who had been celebrated for their loyalty and willingness to sacrifice themselves for her. To see them betray her now was nearly incomprehensible. Jamal smiled as he welcomed Elena to the supposed event, leading her into a desolate, neglected part of town. Elena looked around in surprise, questioning whether an event could really be held in such a place. Jamal hesitated before replying nervously that preparations must have been delayed, and that attendees would arrive soon. Elena laughed lightly, assuming he was joking, and teased him about performing in such a rundown spot. Meanwhile, Ghislain carefully studied their surroundings. The blocked escape routes and unnatural quiet revealed deliberate preparation. Elena, tugging at his arm, suggested they leave. Jamal quickly urged her to stay, insisting a performance was about to begin, but Elena shook her head, stating she had no interest in remaining there. Ghislain, masking his suspicion, asked his sister if she had been working out, joking about her strength. Before she could answer, Philip stepped forward with a menacing look, asking Elena to wait. Alarm spread across her face as she accused the two men of behaving strangely, demanding to know if something was wrong. Jamal offered a false apology, but his unsettling tone made her tense further. He mentioned a request that had been received. At that moment, 3 men entered. 2 were clad in black, while their leader wore a blue coat and a matching hat. The leader, Frank, commended the traders for their efficiency. Jamal proudly announced that they had delivered their mistress as promised and declared that their deal was fulfilled. Frank's eyes narrowed when he noticed Ghislain. Dissatisfied, he remarked that he had never asked for the boy to be brought along. Elena instinctively clutched her brother's arm, holding on tightly as Jamal sneered, mocking Ghislain for following them so blindly into what he called his own graveyard. Ghislain's voice was steady as he asked Jamal if he truly believed he could escape after betraying them. Jamal smirked, brushing off the question. He claimed that he and his ally could simply flee to distant lands, far from this impoverished county plagued by barbarian raids. He insisted that others had already abandoned the land, and they would do the same. Before Jamal could finish, Ghislain closed the distance and, with a single strike, cleaved through his armor. Jamal's body collapsed to the ground, leaving everyone in stunned silence. Ghislain's cold voice cut through the air. Those who had left before never attempted to sell out their own people. He turned to Philip and demanded to know if he was wrong. Philip's face twisted in disbelief as he cursed Jamal, calling him a fool. He scoffed at the idea that a knight could fall to an amateur. Before Philip could draw his blade, Ghislain hurled his sword with precision, striking Philip squarely in the forehead. He crumpled lifelessly to the ground. Elena rushed to her brother's side, shaken and confused. One of the men in black, still stunned, asked Frank if the young man before them could truly be Ghislain. Another muttered that he had no prior combat experience or formal training. Frank confirmed their suspicions, though even he admitted the sight was difficult to believe. The speed and power with which Ghislain had slain 2 knights, using strikes infused with mana, was astonishing. Trembling, Elena demanded an explanation from her brother. Ghislain gave no answer. Instead, he swiftly struck her neck, rendering her unconscious. As she collapsed, he caught her gently and laid her on the ground, whispering for her to rest a while. Frank, watching with a mixture of amusement and curiosity, thanked Ghislain for simplifying their work. He noted that Ghislain was far more capable than expected and revealed that they had already planned to deal with Jamal and Philip themselves. Taking a slow puff from his pipe, Frank asked whether Ghislain had been hiding his true strength all along. Ghislain pulled his sword free from Philip's head and, in a measured voice, asked why Frank was so interested in his abilities. As his eyes swept over the group, he dismissed the men in black as little more than minor distractions. Frank, however, was different. The sheer intensity of his mana placed him in an entirely different league. Realizing the danger, Ghislain decided to end the fight swiftly. He released his mana, preparing a set of strings, and demanded to know who had issued the order against him. Frank only sneered, mocking him with the claim that it was pointless for a dead man to learn such details. Accepting that no answers would come willingly, Ghislain tightened his grip, declaring that the truth would eventually be revealed regardless. One of Frank's subordinates asked if they should simply decapitate Ghislain. Frank ordered otherwise. He wanted him captured alive, every bone broken until his mind shattered. With a sinister grin, He added that Gislin's screams of agony would make the perfect masterpiece. At his command, 2 men rushed forward. Gislin slipped a firecracker from his pocket and hurled it at one of the attackers. The sudden blast made the man falter. In that instant, Gislin closed the distance and drove his blade straight through the man's skull. The second subordinate scoffed, calling it a cheap trick, before launching an attack of his own. Gislin spun his sword behind him, intercepting the blow. Their weapons clashed, but Gislin pressed his grip tighter, sliding the blade upward to slice into the man's hand. Before his opponent could recover, Gislin struck again, severing his head with ruthless precision. Frank wasted no time, launching his own sudden attack. Gislin deflected it with a second blade. Shock flickered across Frank's face. He couldn't comprehend how Gislin had managed to block from such an impossible position. Certain that his ambush had been flawless, Frank was caught completely off guard. Gislin shoved Frank's sword downward, rose swiftly, and slashed clean across his neck, sending his pipe clattering to the ground. Yet to Gislin's surprise, Frank retaliated almost instantly, reinforcing his neck with mana. With a cold admission, Frank confessed that if not for his focused concentration, the strike would have taken his life. Gislin quickly realized Frank had redirected his mana at the last possible moment to minimize the damage. Frank steadied himself, adopting a combat stance. He questioned the origin of Gislin's unorthodox swordsmanship, and, with a sinister smile, promised that this battle would be his last. Shoving Gislin back, Frank mocked his seemingly meager mana, confidently declaring that victory was inevitable. But Gislin only smiled in return. That unsettling expression made Frank falter. In that brief hesitation, Gislin parried his blade, disrupting his balance, and followed with a swift kick to Frank's face. Blood dripped from Frank's lip as he smirked, insisting that such strikes were useless against his reinforced mana. A moment later, he doubled over, coughing violently before collapsing to his knees. Confusion clouded his face. He couldn't comprehend how Gislin's meager-seeming mana had managed to bypass his defenses. As Gislin advanced, his eyes hardened. He revealed that he had long suspected someone of orchestrating his sister's death, though he never imagined Frank was the true culprit. With a piercing gaze, he unleashed the full power of his third core, his mana surging to overwhelming levels. Frank's composure shattered. Before he could react, Gislin appeared directly before him, moving faster than his eyes could track. Strike after strike followed, each heavier than the last. Frank's arms trembled under the relentless assault, his weapon on the verge of breaking. Desperate, he reminded himself that mana bursts usually faded quickly, but this was different. Gislin seemed transformed, a force entirely beyond his understanding. With one decisive blow, Gislin shattered Frank's sword and drove his blade deep into his torso. Frank howled in pain, but his cry was silenced as Gislin seized him by the throat and pinned him against the wall, the sword still embedded in his body. Demanding answers, Gislin insisted that Frank reveal who had ordered the assassination. But Frank, defiant to the end, pulled out a concealed blade and swore he would drag Elena down with him. Before he could strike, strings coiled tightly around his wrist, stopping him cold. With steady control over the strings, Gislin warned him against foolish choices. His gaze was cold and unyielding as he offered Frank a final chance: comply and resist no further, or face the inevitable. Frank froze in disbelief as he realized the threads restraining him were forged entirely from mana. He could not comprehend how Gislin had managed to craft such a tool without him noticing. With deliberate precision, Gislin thrust his sword deeper into Frank's body, his voice chilling as he remarked that someone of Frank's skill should be capable of mending such wounds. Yet, his words carried a deadly weight. No amount of talent would save Frank once his mana core was shattered. Terror flickered in Frank's eyes as he looked down and saw Gislin's blade glowing ominously. His composure broke, and he screamed as his core began to fracture uncontrollably. Rage and desperation filled his voice as he accused Gislin of madness, warning that the backlash could unleash a catastrophic explosion and obliterate everything around them. Did Ghislain truly intend to drag them both into destruction? Unmoved, Ghislain's cold gaze did not falter. He replied with icy confidence that only incompetence lost control in such moments, and he was no such fool. Frank's heart pounded. He could see it in Ghislain's eyes. The man wasn't bluffing. Realizing his death was inevitable, Frank shrieked and confessed the truth. Count Desmond had orchestrated the assassination. The Count sought a manufactured excuse to ignite war between the Perdium and Dard families. The revelation shocked Ghislain. In his past life, such schemes were always carried out by factions aligned with Duke Delaine. To know the Duke was pulling strings once more while staying safely in the shadows filled him with fury. With his patience gone, Ghislain demanded to know if this was why Frank had targeted his sister. Frank gave a grim smile and confirmed it. Without hesitation, Ghislain's blade pierced the assassin's body once more. Coughing blood, Frank gasped, reminding Ghislain of his earlier promise to sheath the sword. Ghislain smirked, asking why a man who had taken so many lives suddenly feared death. Frank's lips curled into twisted laughter, catching Ghislain off guard. He leaned closer, declaring that his death meant nothing. The Dard family's mission was already fulfilled. Perdium was doomed, he sneered, and who would ever believe someone like Ghislain? Snarling, Ghislain seized the assassin's head and slammed it against the wall. His expression darkened as he promised that this time everything would be different. His rebirth was not meaningless. His sword glowed with deadly brilliance as Frank's screams tore through the air. Energy burst from the assassin's body, erupting into the sky like fireworks before his lifeless form collapsed to the ground. Panting heavily, Ghislain surveyed the devastation. His sister lay unconscious but unharmed. Ensuring no one else was nearby, he discarded his weapon and collapsed to his knees, coughing blood. Wiping his mouth, he muttered bitterly that detonating 3 mana cores had once been effortless for him, back in the days when he reigned as the Mercenary King. Forcing himself to stand, he swore he would not fall here. Stumbling into a nearby building, he kicked the door open and discovered 2 corpses. In his past life, there had been 3, including Alinus. But this time, recalling Frank's earlier confession, he recognized one of the dead as a son of the Dagard family. The boy and his escort knight had been slain, their deaths staged to frame Elena as their murderer. Knowing exposure would trigger war, Ghislain silently moved the bodies. He then produced a firecracker, igniting the building in flames to erase all evidence. With the blaze consuming the damning proof, he lifted his sister and walked away, his resolve burning brighter than the fire behind him. He swore his enemies' schemes would never succeed. Unbeknownst to him, a hidden figure watched from the trees. After a long moment, the observer melted into the shadows. The scene shifted to a round table where the spy delivered grim news: the assassination had failed. The council erupted in disbelief. They could not comprehend how Frank and 2 knights had been defeated. Murmurs turned to accusations as they demanded answers from the spy, furious that he had underestimated a mission he claimed would be simple. Nervously, the spy confessed that his failure was the result of Ghislain's interference. The revelation stunned the men gathered at the table. To them, the idea that the so-called useless bastard of the North could achieve anything of importance was unthinkable. One of the members dismissed the explanation outright, branding Ghislain as nothing more than a pitiful excuse and demanding the spy stop using him as a scapegoat. The spy, however, held firm. He insisted that Ghislain was nothing like the reports and rumors had suggested. Recalling how Ghislain had dismantled their forces, he explained that the man seemed entirely different, someone far more dangerous than they had anticipated. Still, the spy reassured his superiors that their larger plans remained untouched. The elimination of the Dard family was still within reach, and sparking a territorial war would not prove difficult. He pleaded for another chance, promising to make amends for his failure. The council members, however, were not swayed. They silenced him with scorn, berating him for his inability to gather even the simplest intelligence on a single man. His incompetence had stalled their strategy, and his audacity to ask for another opportunity only enraged them further. Their verdict was swift: the spy would be eliminated. Before the order could be carried out, a man seated upon a throne intervened. His voice cut sharply through the tension, calling the entire commotion tiresome. He commanded the spy to explain exactly what kind of chance he was asking for. With newfound confidence, the spy declared that he could rid them of Ghislain. The man on the throne pressed him, asking how he intended to do so. The spy revealed his plan: a duel. He already had a candidate in mind. When the council demanded to know who, the spy revealed the name Cain Lois. Renowned for his raw, overwhelming swordsmanship despite his youth, Cain was hailed as the embodiment of sheer strength. The spy argued that no one in the north could stand against him, and arranging the duel would be simple, since Cain happened to be Ghislain's cousin. Fixing the spy with a cold, unwavering gaze, the man on the throne issued a final warning: if he failed again, there would be no second chance. The spy vowed not to disappoint. The scene shifted to the training hall of the Peridum household. Fergus entered the room, announcing that it was time for his master's meal. Before he could say more, something shot toward him. Ghislain, in the middle of training, had wrapped a mana thread around the sword at the entrance and pulled it into his hand. Watching his movements carefully, Ghislain tested the thread's responsiveness, swinging the weapon as he adjusted his control. Fergus approached with caution, apologizing for disturbing the session, and asked how his master had managed to summon the sword so effortlessly. Ghislain revealed the thin strand of energy in his hand, explaining that it was a mana thread technique and art of shaping mana into a string. In his past life, he had relied on it constantly, but in his current state, with his meager reserves, he was forced to implode his core to use the method effectively. His limitations now only allowed him to create a handful of threads at once. Fergus, impressed, admitted he had never witnessed such a skill, despite his own training in mana control. He was baffled by how someone once regarded as unskilled could wield such a refined and advanced technique. Ghislain noticed Fergus lingering and asked if there was something else. Fergus lowered his head, thanking Ghislain sincerely for protecting his younger sister. Ghislain, taken aback by the gesture, responded that he had merely done what needed to be done and invited Fergus to share a meal with him. A day later, as expected, the festival was temporarily suspended after the scandal involving a knight's attempt to traffic the young lady. Within the castle walls, Elena voiced her frustration to her brother, upset that no one believed her when she insisted he had saved her. She urged Ghislain to come forward and confirm the truth. But Ghislain only shook his head, assuring her it was unnecessary. Even if he did speak, he explained, no one would believe him either. Belinda, who overheard the conversation, bristled with irritation. She scoffed in disgust at Jamal and Philip, declaring that she had long suspected the two knights of being depraved. To her, their attempt to take Elena for their own gain came as no surprise at all. Ghislain found solace in knowing that his sister had survived the ordeal. He had successfully averted a war, but deep down, he understood their enemies would not relent so easily. The weight of this realization pushed him toward a difficult conclusion: he could not face these challenges alone forever. A military force of his own was the only way forward. As he mulled over his next steps, a maid entered quietly, pushing a cart with a modest meal. She set a plate before him, and when Ghislain lifted the cover, all he found was a single slice of bread. Confused, he turned to Belinda and asked when dessert would be served. The maid, stunned by his question, asked if he truly had no awareness of their circumstances. Before Ghislain could respond, the sound of shouting echoed from beyond the castle walls. He froze for a moment, startled by the uproar. At the gates, a bearded man of stout build was loudly demanding compensation from the Peridum household, furious over the festival's sudden cancellation. Others had gathered with him, pitchforks raised, voices rising in anger. They accused Ghislain and Elena of squandering the county's money and demanded they appear. Guards struggled to keep the crowd calm. Peering through the window, Ghislain tried to make sense of the unrest. Belinda, standing beside him, explained the situation. The county's economy relied heavily on merchants who prospered during the annual festival. While last year's event had been lucrative, this year's abrupt cancellation left many of them in financial ruin. Their anger, she said, was justified. The revelation shocked Ghislain. He had not realized how fragile the county's finances were. Understanding the danger if the merchants' frustration spiraled further, he resolved to intervene. Turning to Fergus, he asked about the soldiers and ordered them to disperse the crowd. But Fergus gave a grim reply there were no soldiers available. Ghislain stared at him in disbelief. Fergus explained that nearly all their forces had been dispatched to the monster-infested forest to repair the damage caused by a recent orc raid. Frustration lined Ghislain's face as the grim reality sank in. Perdium was trapped in an endless struggle, pressed by barbarian raids to the north and monsters prowling the forest on the other side. Governing such a region felt nearly impossible, and the need for swift, decisive action weighed heavily on him. With no money and no soldiers, the truth became unbearable. Pulling Belinda aside, Ghislain reminded her that she was responsible for his finances. He ordered her to use whatever funds remained to appease the merchants. To his dismay, Belinda informed him that there was nothing left. Shocked, Ghislain demanded to know how this had happened. Calmly, she reminded him that his allowance had been cut off by the Count due to his reckless spending in the past. Reeling from the realization that he was broke, Ghislain desperately asked Belinda to lend him some money, but she, too, had none. He turned back to the window, staring at the town below. His thoughts raced. How had his family fallen into such a precarious state? Without money, even his knowledge of the future seemed useless. He wondered if anything within the estate could turn their fortunes around. Before he could dwell further, Ricardo burst into the room, gasping for breath. Startled, Ghislain demanded to know why he was in such a hurry. Ricardo, visibly shaken, informed him that there was a problem. Kane wanted to see him. The name alone shocked Ghislain. The scene shifted to Scoven, who was barely able to stand. His face was battered, and his opponent struck him with a crushing blow that split his chest plate, sending him crashing to the ground. At the tavern entrance, Ghislain arrived just in time to witness his commander collapse. Scoven, spotting his young master, called out weakly. Ghislain, more irritated than moved, turned his gaze toward Kane. Kane Lowes stood before him, a towering young man with a wide, confident smile. He was the heir to Lowes County Ghislain's cousin, long remembered as both friend and rival. As Kane descended the tavern stairs, Ghislain demanded an explanation from Ricardo. Ricardo explained that he and Scoven had come to investigate rumors of a disturbance. There, they encountered Kane and his escort knight. Recognizing them, Kane wasted no time questioning the rumors he had heard about Ghislain. Scoven had attempted to explain the situation, but Kane silenced him with a cruel grip on his jaw. With a sinister smile, Kane accused him of deceiving the heir of Lowes County, then struck him repeatedly. Turning away, Kane ordered Ricardo to recount the story properly. Ricardo explained that rumors spread of Ghislain, who, despite never training, had defeated an orc barehanded and even subdued traitorous knights alone. Kane scoffed at the tale, claiming he had only been trying to give their commander a much-needed reality check. Kane then shifted his focus to Ghislain, sneering as he accused him of being the source of the problem. According to him, none of this chaos would have happened if Ghislain hadn't lied. Ghislain, however, remembered his cousin's arrogance vividly. Kane had always treated him like a servant, and whenever he visited Perdium, he caused trouble without consequence. No one dared challenge him, for his boldness and confidence were celebrated as the traits of a future heir. Meanwhile, Ghislain's own insecurities and supposed weakness earned nothing but scorn. Yet, instead of anger, Ghislain smiled at the memory. Kane faltered, surprised. He had expected Ghislain to lash out at such provocation. Just hours earlier in Lowes County, a spy had approached Kane with a proposal: kill Ghislain. Initially shocked, Kane listened as the spy promised that the esteemed one would protect Kane's family if he succeeded. Kane admitted Ghislain would be easy to handle, But murdering the heir of a county would be another matter entirely. He demanded to know how they could avoid scandal. The spy calmly explained that they could lure Ghislain into a duel and stage his death as an unfortunate accident, disguised as an escort knight. The spy assured Cain the plan would unfold flawlessly. Smiling slyly, he reminded Cain that opportunities like this did not come often. Grinning with anticipation, Cain expressed disbelief that he now had the chance to kill his own cousin. Excited, he urged the spy to prepare at once. Even then, Cain wondered why such a powerful organization wanted Ghislain gone. Something about his cousin had clearly changed. Smiling to himself, Cain turned to Ghislain and demanded to know why he was simply standing there. Lounging on the stairs, he ordered his cousin to bring what he had prepared for him. Confused, Ghislain asked what he meant. Cain explained he had heard about the festival's disruption and wanted to enjoy themselves regardless. With a menacing grin, he reminded Ghislain that they had always worked well together in such matters. Slowly, Ghislain realized what Cain was referring to: alcohol and women, the very things he had been forced to arrange for him in the past. Back then, Ghislain had obeyed simply to avoid his larger cousin's beatings. Those indulgences had drained his funds, and only now did Belinda's warning about his reckless spending make sense. As the memories resurfaced, Ghislain smiled again, realizing the solution to his financial troubles had been in front of him all along. Snapping out of his thoughts as Cain barked his name, he promised to bring what was needed. But with sharp eyes, he added that Cain first needed to settle a debt. The spy, watching nearby, stiffened at Ghislain's sudden change in demeanor. Cain, caught off guard, asked what he meant. Ghislain calmly explained that every extravagant arrangement Cain had enjoyed in Perdium had been paid for from his own purse. Now, he demanded repayment 1,000 gold. Cain scoffed in disbelief, insisting the expenses could not have exceeded 100. He brushed it off as nothing more than a friendship fee, a token of appreciation. Ghislain laughed mockingly, calling him a fool. He had always been treated like a doormat, but those days were over. With a smirk, he warned Cain to pay up immediately or face a beating. The tavern grew silent as onlookers stared in shock at Ghislain's boldness. Cain's expression darkened. Rising to his feet, he accused his cousin of acting out simply because he had been too lenient. He denied Ghislain's strength, dismissing the rumors of him defeating knights, and called him a parasite who leached off the land, a disgrace despised by the North. With those words, Cain clenched his fist and demanded Ghislain wake up from his delusions. Without warning, he lunged forward with a punch. But Ghislain moved effortlessly, sidestepping the blow. Gasps echoed through the tavern as Ricardo, the spy, and Cain himself stared in shock. Cain's fury deepened, and he swung again, this time aiming for Ghislain's head. Ghislain ducked low, shifted swiftly, and drove his fist into Cain's ribs with a sharp, decisive strike. Cain staggered back, his body racked with pain, shocked by the sheer force of the blow. Ghislain wasted no time, swinging a punch aimed straight at Cain's head. Cain managed to block it with his hand and allowed himself a fleeting smile at having stopped the strike, but the moment was short-lived. His knees buckled beneath him, and he collapsed to the ground, screaming in agony. The spy immediately rushed to his side, frantic, asking if Cain was all right. Ghislain, unimpressed by the display, scoffed and told Cain to stop whining, reminding him that he had blocked the attack. Angered, the spy snapped back at Ghislain, ordering him to stay away from Cain. The tavern fell into an uneasy silence, the crowd stunned at the sight of Cain, the one thought to be unbeatable brought so low by Ghislain. Surveying the room, Ghislain quickly understood Cain's intentions. Leaning close, Cain whispered to the spy, asking if his act had been convincing. With a sly grin, the spy assured him it was perfect, adding that the stage was now set to paint Ghislain as the aggressor. Determined to leave an impression, Cain drew a blue glove from his pocket, raised it high, and declared that Ghislain had dishonored the nobility with his lies, accusing him of an unprovoked attack. Before Cain could finish his speech, Ghislain hurled his own glove at him, silencing him instantly. The challenge was clear. Ghislaine had called him to a duel. Cain froze for a heartbeat, caught off guard, but Ghislaine pressed forward. He accused Cain of insulting him as an heir and striking his knight, claiming Cain had sullied the dignity of the nobility. With a calm, cutting smile, he asked if Cain truly intended to deny it. Regaining his composure, Cain smirked. He had always considered Ghislaine a fool, but never expected him to dig his own grave so willingly. Unsheathing his sword, Cain accepted the challenge, vowing that Ghislaine would regret this, even if it cost Cain his life. Ghislaine then called out to Ricardo, who promptly stepped forward. He instructed Ricardo to gather the merchants protesting outside the castle. Ricardo hesitated, stunned by the request, but Ghislaine, his eyes gleaming with a trace of madness, assured him that they would make a fortune from this. With the festival cancelled, both merchants and tourists had been restless and dissatisfied, but Ghislaine believed that this spectacle would be enough to rekindle their excitement and calm their frustration. Soon, the stage was set. An eager crowd swarmed the area, buzzing with anticipation. Ghislaine and Cain stood across from one another, ready to duel. The confrontation drew in throngs of spectators, many thrilled at the prospect of seeing Cain humiliated. The excitement breathed new life into the town, with merchants reopening their stalls and hawking their wares to tourists once again. Among the crowd, a chubby merchant shouted for bets, insisting that Cain's victory was guaranteed. Merchants, brimming with confidence, placed heavy wagers in Cain's favor. Resting his massive sword against the ground, Cain sneered, asking why Ghislaine had turned a sacred duel into a marketplace spectacle. His voice darkened as he warned that even if Ghislaine begged for mercy, his sword would not stop. Unfazed, Ghislaine replied coolly that the crowd was large enough and signaled the start of the duel. Just as the fight was about to begin, the spy interjected, noting that the betting was unfair. The chubby merchant explained to the crowd that no one had placed a wager on Ghislaine, unsurprising, given how impossible his victory seemed. Cain laughed, mocking Ghislaine, pointing out that even his own people did not believe in him. The merchant suggested altering the wagers, changing them to predict how long Ghislaine could last against Cain. At that moment, Scoven, supported by Ricardo, stepped forward. He placed a bag of gold on the table, declaring his bet on Ghislaine, shocking the onlookers. Moments later, Elena strode up and dropped an even larger bag of gold, announcing her wager on her brother. Even Ghislaine was taken aback. When the merchant confirmed the sum was sufficient, Belinda, standing nearby, reminded Elena that she had warned against such a gamble. Irritated by the delay, Cain barked for the duel to begin. The referee raised his hand and signaled the start. Ghislaine reminded Cain that as his elder cousin, it would appear improper for him to make the first move. The statement unsettled Cain for a moment before he sneered, saying it was far too late for Ghislaine to pretend at brotherhood. At the referee's command, Cain lunged forward, his enormous sword swinging down with devastating force. Ghislaine managed to block, though he was stunned by the sheer weight behind the blow. Cain grinned arrogantly, mocking him for stooping so low as to pretend authority as an older brother. Using the hilt of his sword, Cain shoved Ghislaine back, then immediately swung it again, this time aiming for Ghislaine's head. Ghislaine ducked low, narrowly avoiding the strike, but Cain followed up with a brutal kick. Though Ghislaine managed to evade, the ground beneath them cracked and shattered from the force of Cain's leg. The crowd gasped, stunned by Cain's overwhelming strength. Cain pressed forward relentlessly, refusing to give Ghislaine even a breath to counterattack. With a smug grin, he basked in his own power. Though Ghislaine noted the arrogance in his cousin's expression, he remained unfazed. Belinda, on the other hand, began to panic at the sight of Cain's display. Clutching Elena's arm tightly, she urged her to stop the duel. Not far away, the spies exchanged knowing smiles, already certain of the outcome. They understood Cain's strategy perfectly. His sheer force and unyielding assault left opponents with no choice but to focus on dodging. Eventually, fatigue would slow them down, and Cain would seize that opening to strike the decisive blow. It was a method Cain had mastered and one that had always carried him to victory. As Kane's strikes grew more vicious, Ghislain evaded them with surprising agility. Kane, noticing his cousin's nimbleness, remarked that Ghislain was as slippery as ever. He even admitted that Ghislain's skills had improved since their last clash. Changing tactics, Kane gripped his sword by the blade and swung the hilt toward his cousin, mocking him as he did. "You've always been good at running away, even as a child." Ghislain blocked the strike with his sword, but Kane seized the moment to hook him with the hilt and hurl him into the air. The crowd froze, certain this marked Ghislain's end. The spy smirked confidently, convinced that Kane's victory was already sealed. But as Ghislain descended, he muttered calmly that he had intended to go easy on his cousin until Kane crossed the line. Channeling mana into his legs, he steadied his landing and charged forward with explosive speed. Kane was caught off guard and gasped in pain as Ghislain's blade pierced his stomach. The spy's eyes widened in disbelief as he realized Ghislain had condensed mana into his legs to maintain balance and move with blinding quickness. Ghislain glared at his cousin, mocking his shallow swordsmanship. He accused Kane of mistaking fear for strength, of believing himself invincible simply because others cowered before his power. Taking a firm stance, Ghislain promised to open his cousin's eyes. Enraged, Kane lunged with his sword, but Ghislain countered with a swift kick, knocking the weapon back. Before Kane could recover, Ghislain sidestepped, avoiding the blade, and delivered a precise strike down Kane's shoulder, cutting toward his hand. Kane retaliated with a thrust, but Ghislain pinned the blade under his foot and followed with a near-fatal slash across his cousin's neck. The shallow cuts Ghislain inflicted dripped blood, shocking the silent audience before cheers erupted in disbelief. No one had expected Ghislain to display such mastery. Many in the crowd cursed their bets on Kane, while Elena gleefully pointed out the shift in momentum to Belinda. Scoven simply smiled as he observed. Kane inspected his wounds and realized they were deliberately shallow. Ghislain could have dealt far worse damage but chose restraint. Confusion clouded Kane's mind, unable to comprehend how his cousin's swordsmanship had surpassed his own. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Ghislain tossed his sword aside. His glare never wavered as he declared that their difference in skill was too vast to waste time entertaining the audience. Turning to Kane, he announced that from this point forward, he would fight barehanded. Kane's face twisted in irritation as he demanded an explanation. Ghislain, calm and composed, told him the duel would serve as a lesson. Rolling up his sleeves, he promised to deliver that lesson with his fists. Kane faltered for a moment, stunned by his cousin's audacity. Clarifying his intentions, Ghislain explained that his swordsmanship was superior and that offering a handicap would make the fight fairer. He proposed they settle things barehanded, a style Kane prided himself on. With a stern expression, Ghislain raised the stakes further. He doubled the original wager, adding an additional 1,000 gold, declaring with unwavering confidence that victory would still be his. The crowd erupted in shock at the unexpected escalation, unable to fathom Ghislain's boldness. Among the crowd, the spy was the most astonished of all. He could scarcely believe that Ghislain had the audacity to challenge Kane to a fight without weapons. Yet beneath his disbelief, he felt a surge of excitement, convinced that Ghislain's recklessness would ultimately work in his favor. As preparations for the duel began, the stout merchant urged the audience to place additional bets, loudly declaring the change to a bare-handed contest between Ghislain and Kane. The spectators were divided. Some mocked Ghislain for what they saw as a foolish challenge, while others suspected he had a hidden strategy and staked their money on him. Kane himself was bewildered by his cousin's decision. After a brief hesitation, he gave Ghislain leave to proceed as he wished. Casting aside his coat, Kane lifted his sword, making it clear that he would fight with his blade. Without further warning, he lunged forward. From the sidelines, Belinda scowled in frustration and urged her master to reclaim his weapon and finish Kane decisively. Even as her words rang out, Kane swung his sword at Ghislain with lethal intent. But Ghislain slipped out of reach with a calm smile, realizing that his cousin needed to be taught a lesson. He ducked beneath the sweeping strike, rolled to the ground, and avoided the blade entirely. Kane tried to redirect his attack, but Ghislain was already at his side. In one swift motion, he drove a fist into Kane's thigh. Before Kane could recover, a heavy blow smashed into his jaw, sending him staggering backward before collapsing to the dirt. Dazed and disoriented, Kane could not comprehend how the man he had always dismissed as weak and inferior had suddenly displayed such precision and skill. The crowd erupted in gasps of shock, their belief in Kane wavering as they began to consider the unthinkable Ghislain might actually win. Standing tall with a stern expression, Ghislain demanded that his cousin rise, declaring that the fight had only just begun. Enraged, Kane roared and charged once more, his sword flashing in wild, furious arcs. But Ghislain danced out of reach again and again, waiting for his chance. When the opening came, he seized Kane's arm, twisted it sharply, and forced him down. Before Kane could resist, Ghislain drove his knee into his cousin's ribs, forcing him to cough up blood. Staggering and gasping, Kane struggled to comprehend what was happening. The memories of Ghislain bowing in submission, of always yielding to him, flooded his mind. And yet, here and now, that same man was breaking him apart with merciless precision. Still, Kane clung to his pride, convinced that this fight should have been easy a victory that would secure his family's standing. But Ghislain showed no mercy. Blow after blow rained down, denying Kane any chance to recover. By the time Ghislain finally relented, Kane's face and body were battered and swollen, leaving him trembling in defeat. Seizing him by the hair, Ghislain looked down with a mixture of pity and contempt. He spoke of Count Lose, Kane's father, who had once supported Perdium selflessly even to the point of jeopardizing his own lands out of loyalty and friendship with Ghislain's father. Yet Kane, unlike his father, had chosen another path, one driven by pride and selfish ambition. The words stirred memories in Kane. He recalled bitter arguments from years before, when he had begged his father to stop pouring resources into Perdium while their own county suffered. He had compared it to filling a cracked bucket, pleading with his father to remain at home rather than leaving again to aid their struggling allies. But Count Lose had stood firm, insisting that his actions were bound by friendship and honor. The memory faded as Kane returned to the present just in time to see Ghislain's fist poised before his face. He braced for the impact, but the blow never landed. Instead, Ghislain pulled back and told his cousin that the fight was finished. Extending his hand, he invited Kane to rise. Shame and exhaustion broke through Kane's pride. Lowering his head, he admitted his defeat. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some wailed over their lost wagers, while others celebrated their winnings and chanted Ghislain's name. Elena, standing among the spectators, beamed with pride at her brother's triumph. Belinda and the soldiers by her side, however, could only stare in stunned silence, unable to believe the outcome they had just witnessed. The spy stormed onto the stage, his face twisted with anger. Striding up to Kane, he demanded to know why Kane had surrendered so easily after suffering only the slightest disadvantage. He reminded Kane of the trust and responsibility placed upon him. Yet Kane simply replied that he was finished and insisted it was time to leave. The spy's rage only deepened. Consumed by frustration at Kane's weakness, he seethed in silence. At that moment, Ghislain spoke up, a confident smile tugging at his lips. Turning to the crowd, he announced that the spy had generously volunteered to cover the cost of meat and drinks for everyone present. The hall erupted with cheers, the onlookers declaring their young master the best. The spy, however, stood frozen in shock. He quickly denied making any such promise. Ghislain placed a firm hand on his shoulder, his tone calm but unyielding. He explained that this was the price of defeat. Reassuring the man that the expense would not be deducted from the betting pot, Ghislain added that it was instead an additional contribution expected of him. As his grip on the spy's shoulder tightened, Ghislain reminded him of the wager's terms, which now included another 1,000 gold atop the original 1,000. His cold gaze left no room for defiance, as he warned the spy of the consequences should he attempt to escape. Realizing the severity of his predicament, the spy dropped to his knees in surrender. He understood that refusing would mean certain death, and so he begrudgingly accepted Gislin's demands. The following day, the setting shifted to Gislin's chambers. He placed a large box upon the table and opened it, revealing a glittering pile of gold coins, the profits from his recent gamble. Even he was taken aback by the fortune, realizing it was enough to hire an entire mercenary corps. Closing the lid, he reflected on how difficult it would be to amass such wealth again, and how little time his enemies would grant him to prepare. He knew he needed to act swiftly if his plan was to succeed. As he contemplated, Gislin noticed Elena and Belinda standing nearby. With a nervous look, he asked if something was wrong. Elena smiled warmly and asked her brother how he intended to use his newfound fortune. Gislin laughed and teased, asking if she wanted a share. Elena shook her head, clarifying that she was only curious. Before he could say more, Belinda interjected confidently. She declared that she already knew what he planned to do. With a knowing smile, she reminded him that Lady Amelia's birthday was fast approaching, and teased that his entire display had been orchestrated just to secure a lavish gift for his fiancée. Amused, she remarked that his actions were far too easy to read. Elena gasped in surprise, asking if her brother was truly working so hard just to impress his betrothed. Gislin froze, startled, as though unaware he even had a fiancée. He asked for clarification, but Belinda only laughed, urging him to drop the act and insisting there was no need to feign ignorance. Elena then explained that they were speaking of Amelia from Rayfold County. At the mention of the county, Gislin's expression hardened. Memories of Amelia Rayfold resurfaced. He likened her to a spider. On the surface, she was a noble admired for her compassion and selflessness, a woman cherished by her people. But Gislin knew how history would unfold. In time, she would incite rebellion, earning the infamous title of the Witch of the North, and join forces with the Delphine Duchy to deliver a decisive blow that would hasten Perdium's fall. To him, she was nothing but a traitor. A faint smile crossed his lips as he asked Belinda when their father was expected to return. She informed him that the Lord would arrive within the week. Deciding that this would be enough time, Gislin rose from his chair and declared his intention to visit Rayfold County. Belinda, surprised, reminded him that Amelia's birthday had not yet arrived. She asked what business he had there so soon. Gislin revealed that his purpose was to secure funds from the county. The scene then shifted. A noblewoman placed her shoes upon the ground. She was striking, her crimson eyes gleamed, and the faint mark of a spider near her mouth lent her an unsettling aura. This was Amelia Rayfold. She handed her shoes to a ragged girl at her side. The child trembled, unable to believe such a gift could truly be hers. But Amelia, with a soft smile, insisted that only she should walk barefoot upon this land. Turning to her soldiers, she ordered them to distribute food and shelter to the surrounding villagers. Her men obeyed immediately, and the astonished people looked on in awe. As Amelia departed, the crowd raised their voices in gratitude, praising her kindness. The scene shifted once more, this time to Amelia's garden at Rayfold Manor. A man knelt at Amelia's feet, carefully cleaning them. This was Bernarf, her loyal escort knight. As she idly stroked a cat resting on the table, Amelia reflected on her father's teachings, his belief in absolute obedience from the people of their territory. She noted that the common folk would follow anyone who kept them warm and well fed. Bernarf praised her insight, assuring her that gaining the people's loyalty would strengthen her chances in the competition to become her father's successor. Amused, Amelia lightly struck his face with her foot before demanding news of the duel involving the finest northern swordsman. Bernarf apologized, explaining that he had deliberately avoided drawing attention to himself, as such exposure could endanger their plans. He reminded her that the time had not yet come for her to reveal her claws. With unwavering loyalty, he kissed her feet and pledged his blade to her service. Amelia, calm but commanding, reminded him that he was her blade by nature, as she had invested much in his growth. Leaning closer, her expression darkened as she warned him that weakness would never be tolerated. Then, shifting her focus, she asked about the status of the merchants. Bernarf reassured her there was no reason for concern regarding the Arctium merchants. He reported that their guild was purchasing every resource needed to rebuild the Forest of Beast outpost, recently destroyed in an orc raid on Perdium. He also revealed that they had intercepted the annual support funds Count Rayfold had sent to the region, and were actively recruiting soldiers and knights deserting Perdium. These men, hardened by years of battling barbarian tribes, would make formidable additions to their forces. Pleased with his efforts, Amelia warned him to ensure that the guild appeared to be nothing more than an ordinary merchant operation until their strength was fully secured. As they spoke, a steward entered the garden, prompting Bernarf to rise sharply and demand who had allowed the interruption. The steward, unfazed, delivered urgent news. Ghislain had arrived at the gates seeking an audience. Amelia, taken aback, questioned the reason for his visit. The steward explained that Ghislain claimed to have matters concerning the merchant guild. Both Amelia and Bernarf were startled by this unexpected turn. The scene shifted to the visitor's room, where Amelia entered and took her seat. Across from her sat Ghislain, clad in a rough coat and holding a small flower. He greeted her politely, but Amelia reprimanded him for arriving without notice, scolding him for his lack of manners. Unfazed, Ghislain smiled and offered her the flower as an early birthday gift. He described its fragrance and explained that he had purchased it from the nearby merchant guild, the Arctium Guild, where he intended to buy flowers from now on. Amelia listened but grew perplexed. Rising from her seat, she declared she had no interest in his ramblings and would leave now that she had received his gift. But as she turned, Ghislain's cold voice cut through the air, commanding her to sit. His gaze, sharp and unyielding, froze her in place. The timid boy she once knew who could barely speak in her presence was gone, replaced by a man radiating an intimidating presence. He calmly lifted his teacup and told her he had no intention of wasting her time. Then, with striking bluntness, he demanded 10,000 gold. Amelia, stunned, struggled to comprehend that Ghislain had come only to request such an enormous sum. She pressed him, asking whether this was at his father's command, but Ghislain firmly denied it, insisting the request was his alone. With deliberate calm, he poured the tea onto the floor. Smiling faintly, he remarked that Amelia had never once intended to marry him. The statement left her momentarily stunned. Ghislain pressed on, warning that it would be catastrophic if word spread about her secret attempts to build power, especially during the ruthless succession struggle. As he spoke, Amelia's cat leapt onto the table, growling at him. Amelia brushed off his words as nothing more than a poor jest, but Ghislain calmly assured her that her secret was safe at least for now. However, he hinted that his silence might not last if he left empty-handed. Amelia's expression hardened into a cold smile. She told Ghislain that such a scenario would never come to pass. Without hesitation, she summoned Bernarf. The knight entered promptly, hand pressed to his chest as he greeted Ghislain with formal courtesy. Recognizing him, Ghislain recalled Bernarf as Amelia's loyal companion and a formidable swordsman, a man said to rival even the greatest blades of the north. Looking Amelia in the eye, Ghislain cautioned her that his death would ignite a war. Could she truly handle such consequences? Unmoved, Amelia countered that if a ruffian barged into her chambers, stirred chaos, and was cut down by her escort knight, that was the version of events the world would hear. Smiling, she commanded Bernarf to kill him. The knight obeyed at once, drawing his sword. Realizing her intent was no bluff, Ghislain placed a hand on his own weapon, preparing to defend himself. Before he could act, Bernarf smiled, momentarily catching him off guard. Suddenly, a sharp noise shattered the tension. From the suit of armor behind Ghislain, an assassin sprang forth, aiming a deadly strike at his chair. Ghislain reacted instantly, leaping aside to avoid the blow. As the attacker struggled to free his weapon, Ghislain delivered a brutal kick to his chest, sending him crashing through the window. Both Amelia and Bernarf were left stunned by the display. Turning back to them, Ghislain mocked Amelia's feigned politeness while orchestrating an ambush. With a sardonic remark about her lack of hospitality, he picked up his sword and charged Bernarf. The knight met him with a firm block. With a cold glare, Ghislain demanded to know whether Raold County had abandoned all principles of chivalry. Bernarf, unfazed, offered a mocking apology, reminding Ghislain that he was the one who had entered uninvited and disturbed his lady. Locking Ghislain's sword in his arms, Bernarf declared that courtesy was wasted on someone like him. As Bernarf struck, Ghislain evaded with ease, leaping into the air and landing a sharp kick that forced the knight back, creating distance. Rumors had painted Ghislain as a man of empty words, but the fighter before Bernarf was no novice. Observing the clash, Amelia grew irritated. She demanded to know why her knight was holding back and angrily ordered him to bring her Ghislain's head, reminding him that his duty as her sword was to carry out her will. At her command, Bernarf assumed his stance and released his mana, daring Ghislain to step forward. Ghislain smirked at the arrogance of a mere escort knight presuming to command him. Bernarf, calm and composed, remarked that he was doing Gishan a favor. In the blink of an eye, he closed the distance, swinging with blinding speed. Ghislain barely dodged, but the blade still grazed his face, leaving a shallow cut. Stunned by the knight's speed and precision, Ghislain braced himself as Bernarf unleashed a relentless series of fierce strikes. Forced onto the defensive, Ghislain struggled to parry each blow. Amelia watched with a mixture of surprise and unease. She had never expected Ghislain, dismissed as a weakling, to withstand her knight's ferocity. Still, she remained confident in Bernarf's superiority. Ghislain managed to catch one of Bernarf's strikes, locking their blades together and pressing his sword dangerously close to the knight's neck. Before he could finish it, Bernarf twisted free, trapping Ghislain's blade with his arm. Countering swiftly, he struck with the same maneuver as before. Ghislain smirked, recognizing the move and attempting to repeat his earlier disarm. But this time, it failed. Bernarf's body was reinforced with mana, his strength unshakable. Calmly, he told Ghislain that such tricks would not work twice. With a surge of force, he slammed Ghislain to the ground and moved in for the kill. Recovering quickly, Ghislain deflected the incoming strike and leapt back, creating space once more. He realized that Bernarf's mana reinforcement granted him overwhelming physical strength. Bernarf, in turn, acknowledged his opponent's resilience. Ghislain, he noted, was nothing like the rumors suggested. True skill could only be understood through combat. Studying him carefully, Bernarf observed that Ghislain's swordsmanship lacked the rigid structure of formal training. Instead, it bore the mark of experience sharpened not in classrooms, but in the crucible of real battle. With a confident expression, Bernarf asked Ghislain if he had fought the barbarians so often that he had adopted their chaotic style. Tossing Ghislain's sword aside, Bernarf declared that such wild methods might work on the battlefield, but here they would end. Breathing heavily, Ghislain silently admitted how difficult the battle truly was. Bernarf's precise thrusts, aimed at vital points, disrupted his timing and sense of distance. At close range, Bernarf's larger frame and refined technique gave him an overwhelming advantage. Ghislain realized he was facing an opponent far beyond his current level. Lifting his hand, Ghislain revealed a thin mana thread attached to his wrist. He warned Bernarf that his own time was running out as well. With a sharp tug, he pulled the thread, catching the knight off guard. Bernarf, unfamiliar with the technique, hesitated for only a moment. Seizing the opening, Ghislain struck him at the back of the head with his sword's hilt. As Bernarf staggered, his stance faltered, and Ghislain pressed forward with a brutal knee strike to his face, leaving the knight reeling. Bernarf, dazed and confused, struggled to comprehend how Ghislain had turned the situation around so suddenly. Amelia called out to him, but Ghislain immediately raised his sword and attacked. To his surprise, Bernarf managed to block the strike and counter by shoving him back with his own blade. Ghislain braced himself and held firm. Assessing the battle's intensity, Bernarf turned to Amelia and urged her to leave, warning that he could no longer ensure her safety. With resolve burning in his eyes, the knight declared that he would now fight with his full strength. Ghislain, unfazed, smirked coldly, saying this was exactly what he wanted. It had been far too long since he had faced an opponent this entertaining. The focus shifted to Amelia, who fled the room with her cat in her arms. Anger simmered within her as she recalled the humiliation Ghislain had caused. She wondered how he had discovered the merchant guild, convinced someone must have leaked the information. It was impossible for him to know without inside help. As she ran, Amelia grudgingly acknowledged that the rumors about Ghislain slaying orcs and saving his younger sister from assassins were likely true. Still, she believed much of his reputation was nothing more than luck or exaggeration. Turning a corner, she expected to find the guard she had stationed there, but instead she froze in shock. Her guards lay unconscious on the ground, and a hooded woman stood among them. The stranger turned, smiling as she greeted Amelia, remarking on how long it had been. Pulling back the hood, the woman revealed herself Belinda. Startled, Amelia demanded to know why her maid was there. But before she could react, Belinda moved with frightening speed, appearing at her side with a blade pressed to her throat. She ordered Amelia to remain silent. Amelia froze, wide-eyed at the cold steel against her skin. Belinda's gaze shifted to the spider clinging to Amelia's lip switch. With practiced ease, she plucked it off. Smiling faintly, Belinda revealed she had overheard Count Perdium and Count Rayfold during the engagement ceremony. She recalled how Amelia's siblings mocked her for her fascination with spiders, and how Amelia raised them as tools of revenge. Belinda then questioned why Amelia still wore one. Was it a symbol of defiance or of overcoming trauma? Without waiting for an answer, she tossed the spider to the ground and crushed it beneath her foot, declaring that it did not suit her. With chilling composure, Belinda urged Amelia to cooperate. The scene shifted back to the room where Ghislain and Bernarf's duel raged on. Ghislain sensed the shift in the air as Bernarf released an overwhelming surge of mana. The knight sneered, recalling Ghislain's earlier remark about being entertaining. With disdain, he spat that only a lowly mercenary would think in such terms, dismissing him as unworthy of calling himself a noble like his mistress. Taken aback, Ghislain shot back with a sharp retort, reminding Bernarf that he was nothing more than an escort knight. He warned him never to question his nobility again. Bernarf lunged forward, unleashing a flurry of rapid strikes. Despite the knight's incredible speed, Ghislain managed to parry, though the pressure mounted with each blow. Bernarf's expression hardened as he demanded that Ghislain uphold the dignity of nobility. His attacks grew fiercer, far beyond anything from earlier in the fight, each strike forcing Ghislain further back. Frustrated, Ghislain snarled that enough was enough. With a powerful motion, he deflected Bernarf's blade and drove his sword forward, aiming for his opponent's head. Bernarf intercepted the attack with practiced precision, twisting Ghislain's sword aside and forcing him to retreat. With a swift counter, Bernarf lunged forward, driving his blade into Ghislain's shoulder. To the knight's surprise, Ghislain had deliberately taken the blow, using the momentum to push the weapon away and create an opening. Seizing the chance, Ghislain launched a counterstrike, but Bernarf blocked it in time. Realizing his opponent was far more dangerous than expected, Bernarf kept his guard high, locked down Ghislain's sword, and kicked him back. He coldly remarked that this was the difference between a true warrior and someone who treated the sword as mere sport. Ghislain, breathing hard, found himself exhilarated despite the pressure mounting against him. Bernarf's sheer speed, reach, and relentless assault dominated the battlefield. Every attempt Ghislain made to shift the fight into close-quarter grappling was immediately shut down. At one point, Bernarf cleverly locked their swords together, giving the impression of an even struggle, but in truth Ghislain's depleted mana made breaking free nearly impossible. The duel tilted further in Bernarf's favor, leaving Ghislain in a dire position. As the night pressed forward again, Ghislain realized he could not afford to delay. The battle had to end. Bernarf had accounted for nearly every possibility. Yet there was one element he had overlooked: Ghislain's unique mana cultivation technique. Drawing power from his third mana core, Ghislain unleashed a sudden explosion of energy and met Bernarf head-on. When their blades clashed, the surge of strength allowed Ghislain to force Bernarf's weapon down, tearing it from his grasp. The knight froze, stunned at the impossible sight before him, unable to understand how Ghislain had summoned such power in the midst of combat. Before Bernarf could recover, Ghislain raised his sword, ready to deliver the finishing blow. At that moment, a sharp voice rang out, commanding him to stop. Ghislain turned and saw Amelia standing nearby, her face twisted in fury. She ordered him to take the 10,000 gold and leave immediately. Irritated, Ghislain lowered his blade and stepped back, remarking that things would have been far simpler if she had handed over the payment when he had asked politely. Belinda, observing the scene, quipped that this was far beyond a lover's quarrel. Ghislain, unfazed, replied that it was merely a difference of opinion. He then approached Amelia, resting his sword casually on his shoulder, and informed her of unfortunate news. With a calm but firm tone, Ghislain declared that the price had now doubled to 20,000 gold. In the next moment, Amelia's rage boiled over. She smashed a vase to the floor, the sound echoing through the room. Bernarf bowed slightly beside her, apologizing for his failure. He admitted that Ghislain was far stronger than rumors had suggested, confessing that he had gravely underestimated him. Bernarf explained that Ghislain had unleashed mana surpassing even that of an advanced knight. Amelia's expression darkened. She muttered grimly that Ghislain had changed. When Bernarf cautiously suggested reporting the matter to the Delphine Duchy, her reaction was immediate and brutal. She struck him across the face, seized his shirt, and glared at him with venom. She demanded if he truly understood the terror Duke Deline inspired. Exposing the incident, she warned, would mean certain death. The alliance with the Duke was formed in secret, without her father's knowledge, and depended entirely on their covert agreement. The Duke had promised to back her rebellion in exchange for her help in overthrowing Perdium. If her siblings discovered the arrangement, they would kill her without hesitation. Her fury deepened further as she considered that Ghislain, with his knowledge of the Merchant Guild's secrets, might already be aware of the deal. Turning back to Bernarf, she declared coldly that Ghislain had to be eliminated, no matter the cost. Bernarf accepted the order without hesitation. Amelia then asked about the state of Ghislain's wounds. Bernarf explained that while he had managed to inflict several light injuries and a heavier strike on his shoulder, the explosive use of mana would likely leave Ghislain weakened for a time. However, he cautioned that they could not deploy knights from their own territory, as that would leave behind a clear trail. Amelia acknowledged the problem, reminding him that this was why she had trained a special group of operatives. Bernarf immediately understood her intent and asked if she meant to call upon the Wildcats. Amelia confirmed it. The Wildcats, she explained, were composed of war orphans, outcasts, and those with no place in society. Only the most gifted individuals with natural talent for mana had been chosen for this elite force. Amelia set a flag on the map before her, marking a location, and ordered Bernarf to send a dozen of the Wildcats there. She stressed that only those with refined skill in mana manipulation should be selected. Bernarf understood her reasoning. The ravine she had marked was the only narrow passage between Raffold territory and Perdium County. Its isolated location and difficult terrain made it an ideal spot for covert operations. He assured his mistress that he would ready the Wildcats as ordered. Amelia, her expression firm, swore to repay Ghislain for the humiliation he had caused her. The scene shifted to Ghislain, seated inside a carriage. He wrapped a cloth around his injured arm, lost in deep thought. His senses stirred uneasily. Was Amelia already plotting her next move? Fergus, sitting nearby, asked if he was all right. Ghislain answered that he was fine, noting that the cuts were not deep. Reflecting on the recent battle, he admitted he had pushed himself to the limit, yet was satisfied with the outcome. The 20,000 gold he had taken from Amelia was more than enough to serve as the foundation to rebuild Perdium. For his struggling territory, it was equivalent to years of careful savings. Though furious earlier, Ghislain had ultimately decided against killing Amelia. Her death would have sparked a war that Perdium could not afford. He knew he couldn't risk the safety of his county for personal satisfaction. With the constant threat of barbarian attacks, retreat was the wiser choice. Moreover, the knowledge he carried about the Artium Merchant Guild was already a heavy burden for Amelia to bear. Pulling on his jacket, Ghislain resolved to turn Amelia's misfortune to his advantage. Belinda, observing his composed demeanor, asked if things were unfolding as he had planned. She recalled his earlier orders to subdue the guards when the fighting began and to take Amelia hostage if she left the room. Ghislain explained that he had entrusted those tasks to Fergus. As he spoke, a sharp wave of pain shot through his body, and he coughed up blood. Alarmed, Belinda and Fergus rushed to his side. Ghislain realized it was the recoil from using and unlocking his third mana core. Though the pain was less severe than before, it remained a heavy burden. He knew he couldn't endure such strain every time he tapped into his power, and concluded that he needed to expand his mana capacity. While he wrestled with the thought, Belinda grasped his hand and pulled out a large needle coated with mana. She observed that his mana flow was chaotic and unstable. Without hesitation, she began applying the needle to pressure points along his hand. Ghislain was startled by the sensation, feeling something release inside him. As he exhaled sharply, his tangled mana pathways began to loosen. He quickly realized the technique required advanced mastery of mana manipulation. Ghislain reflected on Belinda's unusual abilities. He had long known she was not an ordinary maid after all. She had been brought into the household by his mother. Yet her true identity remained uncertain. Why would someone so skilled choose to serve as head maid in a rural county? He dismissed the thought. Whatever her reasons, having such talent close by was an undeniable advantage, especially since the challenges before him were only beginning. Belinda, kneeling beside him, assured him of her absolute loyalty and promised to assist him in anything he required. She then asked why he had taken such a large sum of money from Amelia. Ghislain replied simply that he needed wealth, and Amelia happened to be the richest person he knew. Both Fergus and Belinda were taken aback. Belinda voiced her disbelief, warning that Count Raffold would retaliate once he learned the truth. Ghislain, unbothered, assured her that Amelia would never reveal it to her father. With a faint smile, he reminded Belinda of her earlier words of trust. Irritated, Belinda pressed him further, demanding to know his true intentions for the money, insisting that she had risked much by standing at his side. At last, Ghislain revealed his plan to use the funds to conquer the Forest of Beasts. Belinda was shocked, while Fergus expressed doubt, reminding him that every attempt to claim the forest had failed since the time of his great-grandfather. Ghislain then reminded Fergus of the request he had made before entering the castle. Reluctantly, Fergus revealed that the individual Ghislain had asked him to locate was already at the designated place. Nervously, he warned that the man was unstable and not in his right mind. Ghislain dismissed the concern, stating that as long as the man was alive, he was useful, and insisted they leave immediately. Belinda objected, urging her master to return home because of his weakened condition. She reminded him that in his current state, he could not afford to wander aimlessly. Gel countered, explaining that Amelia was unlikely to let them leave without attempting to silence them. Belinda acknowledged this, tapping her muscle with confidence as she reminded him that she was skilled in combat. She also noted that Fergus, as a knight, would be a valuable asset against any threats. Ghislain reassured her of her reliability, but clarified that the role he required went beyond her expertise. With a smile, he revealed that they were on their way to meet the vanguard he had in mind. The group arrived at a wooden house hidden deep within the forest. Belinda remarked that it looked abandoned, but Fergus confirmed this was indeed the correct address. When Ricardo knocked on the door, it opened to reveal a massive, disheveled man with long, unkempt hair. He glared at them suspiciously and demanded to know who they were. Everyone except Ghislain was taken aback by his appearance. Belinda leaned toward her master, whispering doubts about the man's suitability. She pointed out that he looked frail, unlikely to survive another day, let alone fight. Ghislain, unfazed, assured her that they were in the right place. The man, noticing Ghislain's noble bearing, dismissed him as a bored aristocrat and turned to leave, telling them to go away. But Ghislain called out, addressing him as the former captain of the Regressed Mercenaries Jillian. The name froze the man in his tracks. He turned sharply, his expression a mix of surprise and caution. Ghislain smiled calmly, telling him he had long wished to meet him. The group was stunned to learn that the destitute figure before them had once led the legendary Regressed Mercenaries, renowned for demanding mastery of nearly every weapon from its members. Though disbanded, their reputation lived on, respected even by foreign knights. Without warning, Jillian hurled an axe at Ghislain, the blade narrowly missing and tearing through his jacket. Alarmed, the group drew their weapons to protect their master. With a cold glare, Jillian demanded to know Ghislain's purpose. Belinda urged her master to retreat, warning that Jillian was unstable. Ignoring her, Ghislain mentioned the disease known as eternal punishment, instantly freezing Jillian in shock. Ghislain revealed that he knew the cure for the supposedly incurable illness afflicting Jillian's daughter. He described the symptoms: high fever, bloody coughing, and red spots shaped like flower petals spreading across the skin. The sheer agony of the disease had earned it the name eternal punishment. He then asked if this information had captured Jillian's interest. Reluctantly, Jillian stepped aside and allowed the group inside. The sound of a girl's screams echoed through the house. Jillian rushed to his daughter, Rachel, who writhed in agony on her bed. Observing her, Ghislain concluded it was not too late to act. In his past life, he had sought out Jillian to recruit him, but by the time he found him, the man had already lost his daughter, sold all his possessions, and taken his own life. The bare state of the home, filled only with weapons, proved Jillian had already sacrificed everything in a desperate attempt to save Rachel. Through her sobs, Rachel begged her father to end her suffering. Realizing the urgency, Ghislain removed his jacket and declared that he would begin treatment at once. Before he could act, Belinda placed a hand on his shoulder, urging him to stop. She admitted she did not understand what he intended, but insisted the disease was beyond his power. Even priests had failed to cure it, calling it divine punishment from the gods. She demanded that he explain how he planned to face such an illness. Brushing her hand aside, Ghislain declared with certainty that he could save Rachel. Belinda, unconvinced, called out again. Ghislain reminded her of her earlier promise to trust him, leaving her momentarily speechless. He handed her a list of medicinal herbs and ordered her to gather them immediately. Surprised by the unusual ingredients, Belinda nevertheless obeyed and returned swiftly with the supplies. For wandering mercenaries like Jillian, survival often depended on knowledge. Though eternal punishment was considered incurable in the present, Ghislain knew that in the future, a treatment would be discovered. Drawing on this knowledge, he prepared to apply his foresight to save Rachel's life. The cure itself was surprisingly simple, which made it all the more fascinating. Ghislain remembered the method clearly because of its straightforward process. The true obstacle lay in the staggering cost of the ingredients, especially the most vital component, the fairy's blessing. He began by finely chopping the fairy's blessing and the herbs, then tightly packing them into a bottle before covering the mixture with distilled alcohol. He shook it thoroughly, letting it settle, then added the remaining ingredients and stirred until complete. Finally, Ghislain handed the purple, glowing liquid to Jillian, instructing him to give it to his suffering daughter. Desperation left Jillian with no choice. He quickly poured the liquid into his daughter Rachel's mouth. Almost at once, the red spots covering her face began to fade, leaving everyone in the room stunned. They could barely process what they were seeing. Jillian, more astonished than anyone, stared in disbelief at the transformation unfolding before his eyes. Ghislain, calm and composed, remarked that the outcome was only natural. With a trembling voice, Jillian demanded to know how he had achieved this, insisting that even holy power had failed to heal her. Ghislain explained that divine power was not absolute. It could strengthen the body's vitality and enhance its ability to recover, but it was not a true cure. Shaking, Jillian seized Ghislain's arm and begged to know if Rachel could truly be healed. Ghislain reassured him that she would make a full recovery within a few months. Overcome, Jillian stepped back and bowed his head in gratitude, acknowledging that Ghislain must have come to this remote place with a purpose. He confessed that he had nothing left but his body and offered to become Ghislain's servant or even his dog if that was what he desired. But Ghislain rejected the offer firmly. He wanted neither a slave nor a servant. Instead, he declared that he sought the captain of the Regressed Mercenaries. When Jillian raised his head, he caught sight of something extraordinary. Ghislain's eyes glimmered with the boundless ambition of a dreamer. Inspired, Jillian stood and drew an axe. With one swift motion, he severed his long ponytail. The group looked on in awe and apprehension as his entire demeanor shifted. Without the ponytail, Jillian appeared reborn alive, determined, and ready to fight. Moving toward his weapons, he asked if Ghislain had others with him or if anyone else would come looking. Jishan replied that their group was the only one present. Jillian then asked if Ghislain had enemies. Ghislain admitted that he did and that he would likely gain more in time. Taking up a spear, Jillian wrapped a rope around its shaft. With flawless precision, he hurled it through the wooden wall of the house, deep into the forest beyond. The sheer force tore through the wall, and the group watched in silent astonishment as the weapon struck something unseen. Reeling the spear back, Jillian revealed the truth. He had impaled an assassin hiding in the forest. The weapon had pierced the man's chest, leaving him writhing and pinned. Without hesitation, Jillian dragged him inside, seized him by the throat, and demanded to know who had sent him. The assassin, a member of the Wildcats, was stunned that Jillian had discovered him at all. Turning to Ghislain, Jillian asked what should be done with the captive. Ghislain, already suspecting who was behind the attack, placed his hand on his sword but admitted he had no wish to draw it again that day. Jillian stopped him, pressing a hand to the hilt. With a faint smile, he assured Ghislain that he would take care of it. Then, with brutal efficiency, he snapped the assassin's neck. Bowing respectfully, Jillian turned back to Ghislain. Belinda, who had watched everything unfold, was shaken by Jillian's ruthlessness. She struggled to understand why her master would seek to recruit someone so dangerous. But Jillian knelt before Ghislain and pledged his life to him, swearing unshakable loyalty. Recognizing the value of such a powerful ally in his plans of reconstruction, Ghislain accepted with a smile, expressing his eagerness to work alongside him. Meanwhile, deep within a cabin hidden in the woods, a gathering of wildcats received grim news. A trafficker reported that one of their members had been killed. The revelation stirred unrest among them until their leader, VGO, ordered silence. The traffickers explained nervously that Bernard had assured them Ghislain would neither locate their reconnaissance unit nor have the strength to defeat them. VGO questioned whether the scouts had blundered or if their intelligence had been wrong. Trembling, one subordinate finally admitted the truth: Jillian had joined Ghislain's group. Startled, VGO seized his subordinate by the neck and demanded confirmation. The man, trembling, swore he was certain, insisting he had witnessed it with his own eyes. Hearing this, Vigo's lips curled into a satisfied smile. His former captain was finally making a move. The scene shifted back to Jillian, traveling through the forest with Ghislain and the others in a carriage. Belinda, clearly uncomfortable, complained about the overwhelming number of weapons Jillian had brought along. She questioned Ghislain, asking if it was truly necessary to haul such an arsenal, remarking that a single sword or two would have been enough. Frustrated, she pointed out that they had been forced to purchase an additional carriage just to carry everything. Ghislaine remained calm, reminding her that they already needed the second carriage to ensure Rachel's comfort. He assured Belinda it wasn't an issue and urged her to endure it for the time being, emphasizing that their priority was to escape the ravine. Belinda then asked whether the assassin they captured had been sent by Amelia. Ghislaine confirmed her suspicion. Upon hearing this, Belinda explained that the assassin's mask was the mark of the Wildcats traffickers, a powerful and infamous guild in Rayfold. Ghislaine, surprised, pressed her for more details. She told him the Wildcats specialized in smuggling, assassination, narcotics, human trafficking, and other criminal enterprises. Comprised of seasoned former mercenaries, the guild possessed tremendous combat power and operated as a ruthless, shadowy force. Curious, Ghislaine asked how she knew so much despite spending most of her time inside the castle. Belinda revealed that she had acquired such knowledge before becoming head maid. She warned her master to be cautious, stressing the Wildcats' persistence and merciless nature. Ghislaine smiled confidently, assuring her that everything would be fine since Jillian was with them. Almost as if to challenge his words, figures suddenly emerged from beneath the ground just after the carriage passed. They gave chase, and Jillian instantly sensed their presence. As the pursuers drew closer, they leapt out, revealing themselves as Wildcats. With no warning, they launched a coordinated ambush. Reacting swiftly, Jillian drew both an axe and a sword, intercepting their attacks. With a sharp swing of his axe, he severed one enemy's hand before burying the blade into another's chest. Before the wounded Wildcat could counterattack, Jillian crushed his skull, leaving two lifeless bodies on the ground. In retaliation, the remaining Wildcats released ropes that triggered massive trees to fall toward the carriage. Startled, Jillian heard Belinda's cry of warning: if the trees struck, the carriage would be crushed. Moving quickly, he seized the ropes, slowed the horses, and narrowly prevented disaster. Still, their path was now blocked. Ghislaine calmly remarked that he had expected such an ambush. Surrounding them, more Wildcats appeared, and among them stood VGO. He called out to Jillian, addressing him as the former captain of the Regressed Mercenaries. The name froze Jillian in place. VGO accused him of cowardice, claiming he had disbanded the group for the sake of his daughter. Jillian stepped down from the carriage, firmly denying the accusation. Irritated, VGO blamed him for the life he had been forced to live, questioning whether Jillian had grown so senile that he could not even remember his own comrades. Jillian offered no reply, which only convinced VGO further that he was pretending. Smirking, VGO swore he would make Jillian remember and ordered his men to attack. As the Wildcats charged, Ghislaine offered to assist, but Jillian refused. He said it was clear that Vigo's grudge was personal and reassured him that he could handle it alone. Before the attackers could close in, Jillian channeled mana into his axe and, with a single devastating swing, cut down 4 enemies at once. The display stunned the remaining assailants, but they quickly rallied for another assault. Drawing his short sword in his other hand, Jillian met their renewed charge. He struck the first enemy down with his axe, stabbed the second through the throat, and cleaved the third in 2. After deflecting a strike, he stood firm. Watching without surprise, VGO acknowledged that Jillian's strength was unchanged. Calmly, he commanded his men to split into 2 groups and encircle him. As the order was given, Jillian mounted his horse, gripping a massive axe that gleamed in the light. He spun it menacingly before charging headlong into the Wildcats. With a crushing strike, he cleaved through several attackers in one motion. The remaining beasts, wary of approaching him, turned their attention to his horse. Before they could make a move, Jillian fastened a rope to his axe and swung it in a deadly arc, shredding their ranks apart. Belinda watched in shock, unable to believe the ease with which Jillian dispatched them. With his men destroyed, VGO stepped forward and launched a direct assault. Anticipating the attack, Jillian raised his shield and braced himself. VGO shouted that Jillian had ruined his life, vowing that nothing would stop him from taking revenge. Wielding 3 blades, VGO hurled them at Jillian's horse, bringing the beast down. Jillian leapt free just before it collapsed, landing on the ground only to be met with another incoming blade. Quickly drawing a smaller axe, he intercepted the strike and firmly denied being the captain of the Regressed Mercenaries. He slammed his shield into Vigo's ribs, forcing him back. Demanding answers, Vigo growled for Jillian to reveal his true identity if he was not the captain. Calmly, Jillian declared that he had abandoned his past and now served as Gislin's subordinate. The words enraged Vigo. With fury burning in his eyes, he rushed forward, swearing he would kill Jillian at any cost. Their blades clashed, sparks flying as Vigo pressed his sword against Jillian's shield. Snarling, Vigo revealed that after Jillian's departure, the mercenary company had fallen apart. He confessed that without his captain, he had lost his purpose, sinking into disgrace just to survive. Jillian deflected the strike and countered with a heavy swing of his axe. Vigo narrowly avoided the blow, dropping low and retaliating with a vicious kick. Jillian blocked with his wooden shield, but the force shattered it to splinters. Vigo shouted his bitterness, declaring that he had dedicated his entire life to making the Regressed Mercenaries the greatest force in history. He couldn't comprehend why his captain had abandoned everything, only to become a pawn to a spoiled noble. Summoning more blades, he imbued them with mana and hurled them forward. Jillian cut them down with his axe, but Vigo used the distraction to close the distance, lunging with his sword. Jillian dodged by a hair's breadth and retaliated with an overhead strike. Vigo blocked, grinning with exhilaration. Their battle grew fiercer, blow after blow echoing through the field. Vigo admitted he still saw traces of the captain he once respected, though weakened by wasted years chasing a cure for his daughter. In contrast, he claimed his own strength had been forged in endless battles, boasting that Jillian could no longer match him. With a roar, Jillian unleashed a massive swing, which Vigo evaded by leaping high. Using his sword as leverage, Vigo flipped through the air and landed behind him. With lightning speed, he kicked the blades Jillian had deflected earlier, sending them flying back toward him. Jillian raised his armor to absorb the hits, but the moment he did, Vigo charged again. Expecting this, Jillian swung his axe, but Vigo dodged with ease, taunting that the fight was already decided. Then, in a sudden display of strength, Jillian channeled mana into his hand and caught Vigo's blade mid-strike. Shock froze Vigo in place as he realized Jillian had been holding back all along. Jillian asked whether vengeance truly drove him, but Vigo remained silent, his disbelief plain as he stared at the glowing hand gripping his sword. Without hesitation, Jillian slammed the head of his axe into Vigo's face, launching him into a nearby tree. Standing over his battered opponent, Jillian demanded to know his true motives. If revenge had been his goal, why wait so long? Vigo laughed bitterly, admitting that he had once gone to Jillian's old home, only to find a frail old man he deemed unworthy of death. Rage flashing in his eyes, he shouted, demanding to know what had become of the captain he once revered. Jillian tossed one of Vigo's daggers at his feet, commanding him to pick it up. He declared that he was no longer the man he once was, just a body bound by another's will. Yet, unsheathing his sword, Jillian promised to face Vigo with the dignity of a captain once more. His words brought a flicker of satisfaction to Vigo's eyes. Gripping his dagger, Vigo charged again. Their blades clashed in a storm of sparks as Vigo shouted with joy, thrilled that at last, he was fighting the battle he had long yearned for. The intensity of the battle grew as Vigo launched fiercer attacks, yet Jillian stood his ground. With a powerful swing, Jillian attempted to finish the fight, but Vigo dropped low, narrowly dodging, and countered swiftly. Jillian met the strike with his axe, forcing Vigo's dagger downward before driving his sword into Vigo's ribs. Despite the wound, Vigo clenched his teeth and retaliated. Jillian evaded and raised his axe high. He paused briefly, acknowledging Vigo by his full name Vigonos, the 5th unit commander of the Regressed Mercenaries. At the mention of his name, Vigo managed a faint smile. but it vanished instantly as Gillian plunged his blade deep, ending his life. With Vigo's lifeless body at his feet, Gillian retrieved the dagger and stood silently, gazing at his fallen comrade. Ghislain praised Gillian's strength, while Belinda remarked on the profit they could earn by looting the wild cats. Gillian apologized to Ghislain for delaying them, but Ghislain reassured him, expressing admiration for his unmatched skill. Reflecting on his early days as a mercenary, Ghislain admitted that stories of Gillian from his seniors had once inspired him and laid the foundation for his rise as mercenary king. This battle confirmed to Ghislain that recruiting Gillian had been the right choice. He had gained a loyal and powerful ally. Ghislain then asked if Gillian remembered who Vigo had been. Lifting Vigo's sword, Gillian replied that he had once been an old comrade. The words struck Ghislain deeply, stirring thoughts of his own former companions. He wondered where they were now, what lives they lived, and resolved that one day he would find them again. Turning back to the present, Ghislain instructed the group to follow Belinda's suggestion and gather valuables from the wild cats. When Belinda ordered Gillian to lead the effort, he curtly reminded her that he was not her subordinate. 2 days later, the group entered Perdium territory. Belinda, visibly relieved, remarked on their safe arrival. Staring at the city ahead, Gillian asked Ghislain if this was Perdium. Ghislain confirmed, his heart heavy with reflection. He recalled how, when he had first run away, he believed he could return whenever he wished. Now, looking upon his homeland, he felt both contentment and sorrow. As Gillian studied the county, Jishin asked his opinion. Startled, Gillian nervously admitted that it looked impressive. Ghislain, however, disagreed. He pointed out the crumbling houses and explained that repairs were impossible. The fields lay barren, their farmers conscripted into the military. Gillian remarked that he had heard of Perdium's endless conflict with the northern barbarians, but the reality was far worse than he imagined. Ghislain confirmed this grim truth, but declared his determination to restore the land. Turning to Gillian, he stated plainly that he needed his strength to accomplish it. Both Belinda and Gillian were surprised by the sudden appeal. Ghislain knew the coming fight would be long and merciless. To eradicate everything tied to Duke Deline and to protect what had once been taken for granted, he vowed to fight with all he had. Nothing would stop him from reclaiming the land. As they entered the county, Belinda noticed something unusual and called for her master's attention. When Ghislain lifted his gaze, he froze. Ahead stood a familiar silhouette, a man clad in armor, a coat draped across his shoulder. It was his father. At Perdium Castle, several men gathered around the Count in heated discussion. The Count suggested reducing their forces, shocking the room. One man protested, warning that maintaining the front lines would be impossible with fewer troops. Another proposed requesting aid from the Rayfold family, but the general administrator revealed that the Rayfolds had already cut their support, hoarding soldiers and stockpiling food instead. The revelation left the knights visibly unsettled. Another man stressed the urgent need for funds to rebuild the Forest of Beasts garrison, partially destroyed in the recent battle with the orcs. He argued that reducing the Knight Order's strength would offer little financial relief while exposing them to greater danger. Ghislain quietly observed the debate, unsurprised by the chaos. Among the men stood Randolph, the knight captain, known for his commanding presence. Albert, the bearded treasurer, carried an air of stern gravity, while Homer, the general administrator, remained calm and measured. As the arguments raged, Ghislain's thoughts drifted to his father. Though only months had passed since their last meeting, for Ghislain, who had lived decades as the mercenary king, the time felt far longer. Looking at him now, he addressed him directly. "Welcome back, father." Count Zwolorium, his father, found the words unusual. Their conversations had always been formal, never so personal. As a child, Ghislain had resented his father's stern and unyielding nature. But now, with clearer eyes, he could see the weight of countless burdens carved into the Count's shoulders, the exhaustion, the responsibility of ruling, and the ceaseless strain of leadership. While sipping his tea, Zwalter remarked that he had heard of Gislin's absence from the castle for a week. Gislin calmly explained that he had been visiting the Rayfolds. The Count asked if he had caused any trouble during his time there, to which Gislin reassured him that he had not. Albert, the treasurer, then interjected, noting the rumors of a duel Gislin had fought against Kane one he had supposedly won along with a large sum of money. Skeptical, Albert pressed further, asking if the young lord's true purpose in Rayfold had been gambling. Irritated by the insinuation, Gislin clarified that his visit had been for business, not games of chance. He explained that he had been conducting investments with Amelia. At this, Homer, the general administrator, advised Gislin to act more cautiously, reminding him of his future responsibilities as the next ruler of Perdion. Maintaining his composure, Gislin acknowledged the warning but insisted there was no need for concern. Homer's frustration grew, realizing his words were being brushed aside, deepening his unease. Zwalter set down his teacup, cutting through the rising tension. He instructed his subordinates to stop, then turned to his son. With a faint smile, he said he had heard of some good trouble Gislin had caused during his absence. Gislin, puzzled, waited for clarification. The Count then asked if it was true that Gislin had executed Jamal and Philip for attempting to sell Elena. The mention of those disloyal knights left Gislin stunned. Randolph, the knight captain, quickly voiced his skepticism, insisting there was no way Gislin could have defeated both knights on his own. He speculated that they must have turned on each other, with Gislin simply delivering the final blow. Though Gislin recognized the captain's disapproval, he chose not to challenge him. Randolph clearly considered the deaths of knights, regardless of their betrayal, unacceptable when caused by Gislin. To avoid further conflict, Gislin quietly went along with Randolph's version of events. Smugly, Randolph declared that his assumption had been correct. Zwalter, however, dismissed the details, praising his son instead. What mattered most to him was Elena's safety. For the first time, Gislin received genuine praise from his father, an unfamiliar yet encouraging moment. Buoyed by this, Gislin declared that he had a request. Zwalter, surprised, waited to hear it. Before Gislin could explain, Homer interjected, warning him to stop if he intended to ask for money. Randolph quickly agreed, bitterly listing the reckless trouble Gislin had caused in the past, selling military provisions to fund gambling, setting the castle gate on fire just to roast an army horse, and even melting down armor in a foolish attempt to forge a so-called legendary sword. Gislin could not deny the accusations. Though his memories of those incidents were hazy, he knew well enough that he was likely responsible. Still, he clarified that he wasn't asking for money, only his father's permission. When Zwalter inquired further, Gislin revealed his intention. He wanted to pioneer the forest of beasts. The revelation left everyone in shock, but Gislin remained unfazed, smiling with confidence. Later, in his chambers, Gislin recounted the exchange with amusement. He admitted that his father had denied the request, reacting with alarm and even yelling at him. Belinda, however, was not surprised. To her, the response had been entirely predictable. She reminded him that the forest was swarming with deadly monsters and that no possible gain could justify such a reckless endeavor. Gislin then turned to Gillian, asking if he had also heard of the plan from Belinda. Gillian confirmed it, explaining that Gislin intended to fund the expedition with the money received from Amelia. But he also warned of the forest's grim reputation. Known as the Forest of Death, no one who had entered had ever returned alive. Its fearsome notoriety spread far beyond their own lands, and across regions, people universally avoided it. With a calm smile, Gislin assured his guard that he was well aware of the forest's dangers. He explained that there was nothing to gain by delaying their departure any further. Rising from his seat, he walked toward the door and informed Gillian that it was time to begin. Belinda reminded him that he had not received permission from the Count and asked if he intended to proceed regardless. Turning to her, Gislin clarified that he had only asked for permission out of courtesy, emphasizing that he did not actually require his father's approval. He stated firmly that this was something he had to do. Belinda, confused by her master's determination, questioned what he hoped to find in the forest that made him so resolute. Ghislain deflected, promising to explain later. He knew revealing the truth now could be disastrous if word spread. The forest held the key to massive wealth, a vein of runestone buried near its entrance. When infused with mana, this vein would produce runestones, a rare mineral highly coveted by mages. These stones were essential for crafting magical tools, including barriers, magic circles, scrolls, alchemy devices, and for conducting magical research. Their value was immense. In his previous life, Duke Deline had discovered this vein, but in the present, only Ghislain held this critical information. Belinda, unable to discern her master's motives, ultimately chose to trust him, conceding that he must have a plan. Ghislain assured Ghislain that he would follow his orders. Ghislain then instructed Belinda to visit the nearest guild and hire 200 mercenaries for the mission. Belinda, taken aback by the number, remarked on his willingness to spend the hard-earned money he had risked his life to obtain. Ghislain voiced concerns, pointing out that mercenaries were often unruly and difficult to control, especially in large numbers. He warned that they might even betray their employer if the opportunity arose. Acknowledging the risks, Ghislain agreed but explained that he and Ghislain would personally select the most reliable individuals. When Ghislain asked for clarification, Ghislain revealed that they were headed to the most skilled small-scale mercenary group in the north. Ghislain, visibly uneasy, inquired if his master was referring to the Mad Dogs, also known as the Cerberus Mercenaries. He explained that while the Mad Dogs were indeed skilled, they were infamous for turning on their employers if situations deteriorated. Ghislain confidently responded that they were going to put a leash on the Mad Dogs. The scene shifted as Ghislain led his master's horse up a hill toward the outskirts of the Zimbar territory, where the Cerberus mercenaries were based. One of the mercenaries spotted the pair approaching from a distance and alerted his colleague. The second man laughed, referring to Ghislain as a poor soul and remarking that the visitors had no idea what they were walking into. Taking another look through his spyglass, the mercenary realized Ghislain was a noble. Convinced this would be a profitable target, he continued observing until someone suddenly grabbed him. The mercenary screamed in pain, startling the rest of the camp. It was Ghislain who had seized the man and lifted him effortlessly with one hand. The mercenary cursed him, demanding to know what he was doing. Without a word, Ghislain hurled the man with such force that the upper half of his body became lodged in the sand. Outraged, the remaining mercenaries began shouting. One stepped forward, accusing Ghislain of acting recklessly because of his connection to a noble family. Holding a chain with a spiked ball attached, the mercenary smiled and warned Ghislain not to expect to leave the camp alive. Unaware of who he was dealing with, the man paused as someone else entered the camp. Ghislain, seated on his horse, addressed him directly, instructing him to be quiet and fetch his captain. The mercenary laughed mockingly at the demand, spinning his chain as he taunted Ghislain, calling him a noble brat and declaring it was time for him to learn responsibility. As he hurled the spiked chain toward Ghislain, something intercepted it midair. It was Ghislain, who had stopped the attack with a dagger. The blade lodged into the chain, halting its movement and causing the spiked ball to drop to the ground. The mercenary, shocked by the display, watched as Ghislain twisted the dagger further, disabling the weapon completely. Ghislain smiled at the scene, remarking that words alone would not suffice, and instructed Ghislain to handle the situation, but warned him to ensure there were no fatalities. Acknowledging the order, Ghislain took hold of the chain and yanked the mercenary toward him with ease. The man flew helplessly forward, and as he came close, Ghislain struck him in the stomach with the spiked ball. The mercenary cried out in pain, drawing enraged shouts from his comrades, who declared that Ghislain's status as a noble servant meant nothing to them. They charged at him, but Ghislain twisted his dagger deeper into the chain, using it to hoist the injured mercenary into the air. He threw the man into the group of attackers, scattering them as they collided with their fallen comrade. The remaining mercenaries, stunned by Jillian's strength and precision, hesitated as Jillian turned to glare at them. His piercing gaze sent fear through their ranks. Ghislain dismounted his horse and addressed the group, demanding to know how much longer they intended to keep him waiting. He ordered them to fetch their captain immediately. Before they could respond, a voice interrupted, asking about the cause of the commotion. The mercenaries quickly parted, clearing a path for the newcomer. The man with fiery red hair and an imposing presence introduced himself as Kay, captain of the Regressed Mercenaries. Curious about their purpose, Kay asked Ghislain why they were seeking him. Ghislain found the question absurd, believing there was only one reason to approach a mercenary group. Without hesitation, he stated that he was there to entrust them with a request. Kay, taken aback, questioned why a client would harm one of his subordinates. He remarked that a noble should have better manners. Ghislain, smiling, responded that this was his unique way of greeting, adding that it was the most effective method to tame someone. Amused, Kay chuckled and wondered aloud what might have happened if Ghislain had greeted them twice. The scene shifted to Kay's tent, where he and several mercenaries sat with Ghislain and Jillian. Kay asked Ghislain to explain the nature of his request. Ghislain revealed his intent to hire the mercenary group to pioneer the Forest of Beasts. The announcement stunned Kay's men, who were incredulous at the idea of entering a forest notorious for its deadly creatures. Knowing the forest bordered Perdium territory, the mercenaries exchanged uneasy glances. Maintaining his composure, Kay asked Ghislain what kind of person he must be to consider disturbing such a perilous place. Ghislain introduced himself as the young lord of Perdium. Kay and his men, surprised by the revelation, erupted into laughter. They could hardly believe they were speaking to the infamous young lord described in local rumors. Their laughter grew louder as they became convinced Ghislain had lost his mind. Kay, dismissive, told Ghislain that he likely had no idea what the Forest of Beasts was truly like, having grown up sheltered in a greenhouse. He asserted that the forest was no place for rookies like him. Declaring the discussion over, Kay signaled his men, who raised their weapons. Jillian, seeing this, lifted his axe in preparation for a fight. Ghislain, unfazed, asked Kay if he was afraid. The question startled Kay, who responded with a smile that he was disappointed. He remarked that he had heard of the Regressed Mercenaries' reputation for skill, but now believed it to be a hoax. Placing his foot on the table, Kay warned Ghislain not to provoke him, reminding him that mercenaries do not take jobs that offer no worthwhile reward. Ghislain replied that weaklings often rely on excuses, a comment that visibly annoyed Kay. Kay declared that Ghislain was ruining the mood with his pathetic provocations, dismissing him as a clueless brat unworthy of his time. He assured Ghislain that he would allow him to leave unharmed, but demanded compensation for the trouble caused. Ghislain, his demeanor now serious, refused. He then made a bold request Amarana's recognition with Kay, captain of the Regressed Mercenaries. Both Jillian and the other mercenaries were shocked by the challenge. Kay, narrowing his eyes, asked Ghislain if he even understood what he was asking for. Ghislain, wearing a confident smile, confirmed that he did. He explained that Amarana's recognition was a traditional mercenary duel bound by strict rules. Each participant used only a single dagger, with one arm tied to their opponent. The use of mana was strictly forbidden, and stepping outside the designated circle counted as a loss. The match forced both participants into a brutal life or death struggle within a confined space that limited their movements. Often, the duel resulted not only in the death of the loser, but sometimes even the victor. Ghislain explained that the terms of the match required the loser to admit defeat without reservation and submit completely to the winner, effectively becoming the winner's subordinate or dog. He then asked Kay how he felt about the bet. Jillian, observing his master, was puzzled at how a noble could be so familiar with such a crude mercenary tradition. Rejecting Amarana's recognition was seen as an admission of weakness, making refusal virtually impossible. Kay began laughing maniacally, his expression turning unsettling. Addressing his subordinates, he mockingly announced that they had a bold young noble who wanted to prove himself by mercenary standards. Encouraged by their captain, the mercenaries laughed along, amused by the absurdity of the situation. The scene shifted outside, where Ghislain and Kay stood ready for the duel. Their arms were tied together and each was handed a dagger. Kay removed his jacket, revealing his imposing physique. The mercenaries cheered for their captain, shouting for him to kill the insolent noble. Carr, believing Ghislain had only heard of the tradition and was bluffing, told him there was no turning back now. Pulling Jishon closer with a binding, Carrick confidently declared that he had already participated in this type of duel 5 times before. Returning to his starting position, Ghislain pulled Kerr toward him and, with a cold, condescending gaze, revealed that he had completed this type of duel over 100 times. The captain was visibly shocked by the claim. At the signal to begin, both men charged at each other with daggers, narrowly dodging each other's opening strikes. They swung again, movement sharp and precise, but neither landed a blow. Ghislain pressed forward with greater strength, forcing Kair to block. Seizing an opening, Kair yanked Ghislain toward him and attempted a stab from behind. Ghislain, though unable to see the blade clearly, blocked each strike with skill. When Kair missed, Ghislain bent his head to avoid the attack and countered swiftly. Kair evaded and retaliated, pulling Ghislain close and delivering a heavy kick to his leg. The impact was jarring, but Ghislain endured. Surprised by Ghislain's resilience, Kair admitted he was performing better than expected. He expressed disbelief at the claim of over 100 Marana's recognitions, noting most mercenaries never experienced even one. Charging again, Kair mocked Ghislain, telling him he should at least make his bluffs convincing. This time, he gave no chance to counter. The Cerberus mercenaries, thrilled by the fight, cheered for their captain to finish Ghislain. But their voices died under Jillian's intense glare, silencing them instantly. Observing closely, Jillian recognized the danger of the situation. The dueling circle was so small it could barely fit one person lying down. With no mana or external force allowed, victory depended entirely on physical skill and strength. The tied hands created another disadvantage for Ghislain, restricting his movement while Kair could fully dominate the fight. Ghislain barely managed to block or evade while Kair pressed relentlessly. Watching carefully, Jillian rested his hand on his axe, ready to intervene if things turned dire. Kair seized Ghislain's arm and pinned him, swinging his dagger downward. Ghislain barely evaded, jumping to the other side and landing unsteadily. A sharp pain surged through his leg, the same one injured by Kair's earlier attack. Without mana, the damage was taking its toll. Seeing his expression, Kair smirked, mocking him for looking pale and asking if he had already reached his limit. Intensifying his assault, Kair drove Ghislain onto the defensive. Despite his contempt for nobles, he admitted Ghislain showed more determination than most. Still, he dismissed Ghislain as lacking skill, believing he had already seen through his strategy of deflecting dagger strikes while taking lesser blows on his body. Yet Kair also knew the harsh truth of Marana's recognition. Without mana, every hit accumulated damage. The strain showed in Ghislain's movements and face. Relishing the fight, Kair spun his dagger and charged. Ghislain blocked, but immediately had to dodge as the blade came for his head. He bent low to avoid it and countered from below, but Kair blocked easily. Dragging Ghislain's arm aside, Kair pinned him again and delivered a brutal kick to his injured leg. Ghislain winced in pain, and Kair, convinced victory was certain, raised his dagger and commanded him to prepare to die. His subordinates erupted in cheers. From the sidelines, Jillian tightened his grip on his axe, ready to intervene. But before Kair could strike, Ghislain smiled. With sudden agility, he lowered himself even further, dodging the dagger in a move that stunned Kair. Seizing the opening, Ghislain shifted to the side and slashed precisely near Kair's ribs. The strike left Kair momentarily stunned, and gasps erupted among the mercenaries. Even Jillian was shocked. Enraged, Kair charged again, but Ghislain evaded low and countered with a slash across his chest as he passed. The mercenaries stood in disbelief. Their captain, who had dominated moments before, was now wounded twice. They shouted for him to show the strength of a true mercenary. Meanwhile, Jillian watched in astonishment at his master's movements. Realizing Ghislain possessed far greater skill than he had imagined, Kair swung at Ghislain's head. Ghislain ducked low once more and, rising quickly, slammed his shoulder into Kair's face. With the dagger tightly clenched in his fist, Ghislain delivered several blows to the captain's face in rapid succession. Before Kair could recover, Ghislain rotated his dagger and stabbed it into Kair's hand. Despite the injury, Kair did not cry out. Instead, he charged at Ghislain with renewed ferocity. Ghislain, however, easily dodged each attack. Kair began to falter, confused by the sudden change. Just moments earlier, Ghislain had seemed barely capable of withstanding his strength. Watching intently, Jillian finally understood Kair's reliance on brute force was his downfall. His powerful swings had stiffened his muscles, making his body rigid and slow. By contrast, Ghislain avoided resisting directly. He relaxed his movements, using the captain's momentum to turn the fight in his favor. Impressed by this unexpected display of strategy, Jillian quietly placed his axe back in its sheath. As Kair gasped for breath, his men taunted him, urging him to stop playing around and finish the fight. Ghislain commended Kair for his resolve, noting that many others in his position would have resorted to breaking the rules by using mana. Kair, smirking despite his exhaustion, replied that Ghislain spoke like someone who had truly fought in 100 Marana recognitions. He revealed that he had earned his position as captain through this very method, adding that mercenaries who broke the rules never survived long. Ghislain smiled at his words, admiring his spirit. Kair admitted that he was at a disadvantage in a direct confrontation, but reminded Ghislain that victory in Marana's recognition was not limited to overpowering an opponent. Stepping outside the circle, he said, was an automatic loss. With that, Kair grabbed Ghislain's arm, hoisted him into the air, and tried to throw him out of the circle. Confident in his plan, he believed victory was his. But before Ghislain's foot could touch the ground, he tightened his grip on Kair's hand, pushed his legs upward, and braced against the captain's knees to halt his descent. Using Kair's body for support, Ghislain reversed the momentum, pulling him forward. In one swift motion, Ghislain climbed up Kair's leg, maneuvered behind him, and locked his arm around the captain's neck. With a powerful slam, he drove Kair's head into the ground, pushing it outside the circle. The mercenaries stared in stunned silence, unable to believe what had just happened. Realizing his loss, Kair glared at Ghislain in frustration. Ghislain smiled gently, declaring his victory. Still in disbelief, Kair demanded to know Ghislain's true identity, unable to reconcile such skill with the idea of him being a noble. Fixing him with a cold, piercing gaze, Ghislain stated that he disliked the captain's attitude and reminded him that he was now speaking to his new master. Pulling Kair to his feet, Ghislain asked what he planned to do next. Thinking the fight over, Kair was shocked when Ghislain calmly corrected him, pointing out that he had not yet stepped outside the circle. Ghislain clenched his fist and announced it was time to discipline his subordinate. He struck Kair in the face, sending him to the ground. Kair quickly raised a hand, insisting the fight was over the moment a combatant left the circle. In response, Ghislain struck him again, asking if he intended to follow such rules on the battlefield. Enraged, Kair called him a bastard and shouted that nobles were not supposed to act this way. Ghislain's expression hardened as he ordered him not to speak back to his master. When Kair spat back, calling him a lunatic, Ghislain hit him again. The punches came one after another until Ghislain's hand was smeared with blood. The mercenaries watching grew uneasy. They had expected Ghislain to release their captain after winning the duel, but instead the beating continued. Kair, his face swollen and bloodied, begged Ghislain to stop. Ghislain pulled him up once more and, with a cold gaze, reminded him that he still had not stepped out of the circle. Horrified, Kair turned to his men and ordered them to intervene and kill Ghislain. The mercenaries drew their swords, but before they could move, Ghislain unsheathed his axe. His commanding tone froze them in place as he warned that anyone interfering with his master's discipline would be killed. Seeing the deadly intent in his eyes, none dared to step forward. Kair, trembling like a beaten dog, turned back to Ghislain. Asked if he was finished, his only reply was nervous, fearful laughter. He knew he had miscalculated. Another punch landed, forcing him back. For the first time, his overconfidence had failed him. Kair had always seen nobles as pompous, arrogant, and selfish fools easily manipulated with the right scare tactics. This disdain had earned him the nickname Mad Dog, a title he proudly embraced. Yet now, the so-called Mad Dog was being thoroughly beaten by the noble he had underestimated. The mercenaries, visibly worried by their captain's condition, glanced at one another, unsure of what to do. Kar's face was swollen, his body bruised, and his strength depleted. Ghislain paused to assess Kar's injuries and then turned to the mercenaries. Breaking the silence, he ordered them to fetch water, bandages, and a towel. The men were taken aback by the command, but Ghislain calmly warned that their captain would die if they didn't act quickly. Shocked into action, they complied with his orders. Ghislain observed the scene closely. He noticed how the previously unruly mercenaries were now following Ghislain's commands without question. In a world where strength often carried more weight than laws, Ghislain had established his authority in the most direct and irrefutable way. He had demonstrated who was in charge. In the next scene, Kar sat slumped in a chair, his body wrapped in bandages. Ghislain placed a sheet of paper on the table in front of him and instructed him to sign it. Kar, staring at Ghislain with a mixture of defeat and resignation, realized that he had no choice but to comply. He hesitantly took out a pen and signed the document. As he handed it over, he nervously asked Ghislain to take it. Fixing him with a cold stare, Ghislain demanded he repeat what he had just said. Now visibly shaken, Kar stammered that he looked forward to working with him. Ghislain grabbed Kar's hand, causing him to flinch. With a calm but firm tone, Ghislain told him they were now family and that he too looked forward to their collaboration. A few days later, at the outskirts of Perdium territory, a group of mercenaries had gathered in the early morning. One of them, yawning, asked if anyone knew why they had been summoned so early. A bald man carrying a shield chimed in, mentioning a rumor that their employer was the young lord of Perdium. The mercenaries were shocked to hear this. One of them scoffed, calling Ghislain just a brat and doubting his ability to manage mercenaries effectively. He speculated that the job would be easy. A shirtless, heavily built man clapped his hands to grab the attention of the group. Known as Gordon the Muscle, he smiled and addressed his fellow mercenaries, suggesting they needed a representative to handle their young employer. His imposing presence caught everyone's attention, and they nodded in agreement. Gordon commended their cunning in devising ways to gain rewards without effort, but he warned them that their plan would fail without unified voices. The mercenaries agreed, recalling past incidents where poor coordination had led to failure. The bald man asked Gordon about his plan, and he explained that knowing one's boundaries was crucial. Opening a bag of coins, he announced that he would act as their representative to pressure their employer, requesting contributions from the group for his efforts. Impressed by Gordon's confidence and size, they believed him to be the perfect choice for the task. Praising his reliability and wit, they added coins to the bag. Their plotting was interrupted when one of them noticed someone approaching. Looking up, they saw Ghislain riding toward them alone on his horse. The sight surprised them, and one remarked that Ghislain might flee once he saw Gordon's intimidating build. Gordon instructed the group to approach together, creating an imposing presence. Smiling confidently, he declared it was time to teach the young lord a lesson about the real world. However, before Gordon could confront Ghislain, he noticed a group trailing behind him. As they drew closer, the mercenaries identified them as the Cerberus mercenaries, recognizable by their distinct dog snout-shaped helmets. Shocked, Gordon questioned how Ghislaine had managed to recruit the infamous Mad Dogs. When Ghislaine finally reached the group, the mercenaries instinctively stepped back. Turning to Gordon, Ghislaine asked if he was the representative. Now visibly nervous, Gordon admitted that he was. Ghislaine inquired about his name, and Gordon introduced himself as Gordon the Muscle. Ghislaine smiled, commenting on the uniqueness of the name before tapping Gordon's chest and calling it pretty cool. He then introduced himself as the young Lord of Perdium and commanded Gordon to gather the mercenaries. Once assembled, Ghislaine addressed them with a serious demeanor. He announced that the time had come to begin the pioneering of the Forest of Beasts. In the next scene, Belinda was assisting Ghislaine in donning his armor. All preparations for the expedition had been completed. The temporary base had been constructed, resources had been procured, and the most critical asset, the troops, had been secured. Ghislaine requested Belinda to perform a final head count, and she obliged. She informed him that 148 mercenaries had been contracted through the office, along with 41 Cerberus mercenaries he had brought himself. The total number of personnel reached 192. Ghislaine acknowledged Belinda's effort, commending her for the work, and asked whether Scoven had been properly informed. Belinda assured him that Scoven had been notified. Contrary to her expectations of resistance, the knight had stepped in to ensure their passage through the Forest of Beasts remained undetected. As the commander of the forest post, Scoven's involvement gave Belinda confidence that no immediate issues would arise. She urged Ghislaine not to worry, and her reassurance brought a smile to his face. Ghislaine then called for the mercenaries to assemble. He addressed them, stating that the land they were about to pioneer lay ahead. Acknowledging the rumors surrounding the forest, he explained that it was a place filled with unknown dangers, inhabited by monsters and unseen threats beyond imagination. Yet, he declared his determination to conquer it despite its perils. The mercenaries, visibly unsettled by the mention of the Forest of Beasts, murmured among themselves, claiming they had not been informed of such dangers and feared for their lives. Belinda stepped forward, silencing them, and reminded them not to interrupt while their leader was speaking. Ghislaine gave the mercenaries an opportunity to withdraw if they wished, but promised to pay them 3 times their current wages should the mission succeed. The unexpected offer shocked the group, as it was an exceedingly tempting reward. Belinda moved closer to her master and whispered her concerns, pointing out that all their funds had already been spent on preparations. Ghislaine calmly explained that such promises were necessary to boost morale. Confident in the mission's success, he assured her there would be sufficient funds to fulfill his word. When he asked if she trusted him, Belinda admitted she had no choice but to place her faith in him. Carr then remarked to Julian that their master must be out of his mind to offer such an extravagant reward and questioned how Ghislaine intended to honor his promise. Julian, however, simply replied that their master always had a plan. Ghislaine officially named the group the Forest of Beasts Expedition Team and declared it was time to move out. As the group progressed, they began cutting down the trees obstructing their path. Everyone, including Ghislaine, actively participated in clearing the way. After felling a tree, Ghislaine looked up relieved to see sunlight piercing through the thinned canopy. Raising his hand, he directed the men to continue clearing the path toward the indicated direction. He instructed them to chop the felled trees into logs, load them onto carriages, and dig around the stumps to facilitate their removal. According to the Forest of Beasts Developmental Journal, a resource Ghislaine had obtained in his previous life, the forest was vast and rich in untapped potential. He firmly believed that one day the monsters would be driven out and the forest's resources fully utilized. At that moment, what Ghislaine needed most was money. He chose to disregard all other concerns, focusing solely on securing the quickest route to the Runestone Vein. The wealth from this expedition would play a pivotal role in halting the conspiracy surrounding Perdium. Kerr found it peculiar that their employer was taking such an active role. While one mercenary suggested Ghislaine was simply trying to uphold the dignity of a noble, another mercenary scoffed, claiming he was merely pretending and would soon give up. Belinda, overhearing their remarks, firmly told the men to stop gossiping and return to their work. Though they obeyed, she was visibly irritated by their dismissive attitude toward her master. She approached Ghislain, reminding him of the considerable effort he had put into hiring the mercenaries. She questioned why he was personally involved in the labor, pointing out that his actions made the men take him lightly. Ghislain reassured her that it was fine, explaining that having more hands on the job would allow them to finish faster. He emphasized that lingering in the area for too long would bring no benefit. Accepting his reasoning, Belinda remarked that he spoke as though he already knew what lay ahead. Keir observed their exchange with a bemused smile. He found it hard to believe that his employer had someone worrying about him while he himself had become the dog of his master, willingly heading into danger. Ghislain, overhearing this, struck Sir with a log, prompting Carr to accuse him of trying to pick a fight. Despite their banter, the operation proceeded smoothly. The Duchy of Deline, which had conquered the kingdom and established a new dynasty, had launched a large-scale development initiative in the Forest of Beasts. Ghislain had been unable to uncover the Duke's specific motivations for focusing on the forest. However, he had obtained a developmental journal that detailed major resource locations and the ecosystem of monsters. Armed with this knowledge, Ghislain had come better prepared. One of the mercenaries, noticing the abundance of oil lamps among their supplies, wondered aloud why they had been brought instead of cheaper torches. The lack of incidents along the way unsettled Ghislain. He had only read about the dangers of the forest and had no first-hand experience. Sensing the deepening of the forest, he cautioned the men to remain vigilant. While some mercenaries continued cutting trees, one remarked on the increasing darkness, asking if night had already fallen. Another mercenary, smiling, noted that no monsters had been encountered despite the forest's fearsome reputation. Agreeing, his companions speculated that the dangers had been exaggerated. He joked that even without any effort from their leader, Gordon, the job would have remained simple. They lamented that tripled pay seemed excessive for such an easy task. As they spoke, a bald mercenary struck Gordon on the back while he carried a log, jokingly demanding his money back. Gordon, however, noticed something strange. Turning to the others, he pointed out that they had cut countless trees along the way. When asked, the men confirmed that they had. Gordon's expression darkened as he directed their attention to the path behind. It was inexplicably blocked. The mercenaries froze in shock at the sight.